It is with great sadness that I have to announce the sad death of former councillor Mrs. Beatrice Lithgow. Mrs. Lithgow represented the Belmont ward from 1976 to 1994 and was mayor of the Borough of Loughborough in 1990. She was also president of the Town Twinning Association. Our thoughts are with her family and friends, and would members please join me in a minute's silence as a mark of respect. Thank you. The floor is open if anyone would like to pay tributes to Beatrice Lithgow. Thank you. Apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Councillor Cooney and Councillor Dowson, and also Councillor Griffiths won't be present till a little bit later due to attending a funeral. Are there any other apologies for absence?
Yeah, we've got Councillor Brenda Foster, Councillor Helen McCluckey, and possibly Councillor Dick and Councillor Dennis.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Thank you. Okay, there's a form circulating if anyone has any declarations of interest. Could I please have somebody confirm the accuracy of the minutes of the special meeting held on the 9th of March?
Move those minutes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Massey. Okay, on to my announcements. There's a couple of charity events I'd like to mention. I did do my charity skydive last week, and the sum total at the moment is somewhere in the region of £2,500 to £2,700. Thanks to everyone for the support, and especially the businesses of Mask have been really generous. Also, I held a Soul and Motown night, which raised £600. Thanks to Sheila and Tim Argument for that suggestion and helping me arrange that. And I'd like to thank those of you who are supporting my charity ball, which is on the 27th of April. And if anyone has any donations of raffle prizes or gifts, if you can please pass them into Jane's office. The investiture of the new mayor will be held on the 22nd of May 2018. As we have a very large agenda today and members of the public are here for particular items, as we have done in the past, I intend to change the order of the business. We will deal with the business up to and including the petition, then deal with agenda item 11, the motion regarding the votes at 16, then Councillor Wilson's question to the Leader of the Council, then finally return to the order of business at agenda item 8. Are there any announcements from the Leader of the Council, please?
Yep, thank you, Madam. Oh.
Okay. I noticed that you've changed the order of the order, which I understand. What I cannot understand is why we have item 8. In all previous council meetings, we have been advised that the governance protocol is that leftover business will be contained in the agenda item that is appropriate for it, whereas on this occasion we have created a special item. Is this a precedent that we are going to continue to follow? Is it a change in governance, or is there any other rationale as to why we have this order?
Right, which Councillor item 8, which one are you referring to specifically, please, Councillor Thompson?
The motions that were left over from the previous meeting.
I'll let Steve answer that one.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I think there might be confusion, Councillor Thompson, with the arrangements regarding questions, because the general arrangement is that all of the held over items from a previous meeting are dealt with as once on the agenda first. But with questions, the Governance Review Group undertook that piece of work that we all recall, and the arrangement there was that the questions would remain as the last agenda item on the agenda for the next meeting.
Thank you. I think it's we're covering things obviously so members of the public can go about their business. So announcements from the Leader of the Council, please.
Yep, thank you very much indeed, Madam Mayor. And can I first of all just congratulate you on your skydive?
Thank you.
I don't think I would do that under a million years, so well done in doing that. I saw the photos, they look very scary. Okay, I've just got a couple of things I'd like to talk about today, please. The first one I've put under the heading of iconic attractions, because I think we do have a number of iconic attractions in the borough, and I just want to talk about 3 of them because I just want to give you an update. The first one is the Regent Cinema. Like all of you, I was really shocked to hear that the Regent Cinema was going to have to close, even be it only for a short while. And we are working very closely with Neil Bates, the operator, to try and get it open again as soon as possible. As I'm sure those of you who are on Facebook and things, and indeed read the press, will know that the public interest has been huge. And I absolutely recognise the importance of the cinema to many people in the borough. For those of you who don't know, a structural survey is currently underway. We're expecting the results next week, and I'll obviously keep you updated about what then needs to happen next. So that's happening. The second iconic attraction is the Ironstone Mining Museum, which I'm sure many people here know more about than I do. But unfortunately, this is currently closed as well, following the collapse of their dome. The cause of the collapse is currently being investigated, and again, we're working closely with them to get that facility open again as soon as possible. Many of you will know that they've recently received a good lump of funding to support the development of that facility, and it's really sad that this has happened at this time, so we'll do everything we can to try and ensure we get that back open as quickly as possible. And then the third one is the Cliff Lift, and that's a slightly better news story. Some of you will have seen some of the good press coverage that we've had recently about the Cliff Lift. The level of refurbishment work has proven greater than planned, and it has required some significant engineering expertise. But thanks to the contractors and the council officers, who've all been really involved in getting that work done, we hope we're nearly there. And we're very much hoping that we can get the Cliff Lift open within the next little while, hopefully by the end of May. But don't hold me to that, but we're working on that to try and do that. So they're the 3 iconic things, all really important for the borough, all really important that we support them and get them back open as soon as possible. I now just want to switch tack slightly to the economy and just talk about a couple of things that I normally talk about at this point. The first is the Ssi Task Force. The latest report, which gives the figures up to the 27th of March, I don't think has been circulated yet, so I will make sure that that's circulated shortly. Additionally, you'll be aware that we have also been working with the potential problems that there are at the Bulby mine. And just to update you on that as well, the original announcement was for 230 redundancies, and that was made in January 2018. That, we think, has reduced slightly. And we're expecting half of the redundancies to be voluntary, the other half compulsory. We are working very hard with those at the mine to ensure that support is provided to everybody who needs it, and there's a jobs fair being proposed on site for the 23rd of May. We will, of course, continue to work to support those workers. So obviously we are doing everything we can to ensure that that support is provided. Just very quickly, Madam Mayor, because I know we have a long agenda, I just want to say a couple of other things about the economy. I don't know if you all get the unemployment figures, but our latest unemployment figures were published this week. The Tees Valley rate has stayed at 4.3%. That's more than double the national rate, and it's a slight rise on this time last year. And in Redcar, our figure is 3.8%. For young people, it's 7.2% compared with just 3% nationally. So what we're seeing really in the Tees Valley is continuing poor jobs growth, and you know, that isn't helpful. However, I did just want to comment very quickly on a couple of things that are happening that hopefully will have some impact on that. And they relate to, well, three things really. The first is the Sirius mine. I was very lucky just before or just after Easter to go and visit the Sirius mine. And they are making excellent progress. And, you know, if you get a chance to go to the site near Whitby and have a look, you will see just the extent of the investment that is in there now. There is still more to be done and more money to be raised, but it's really good to see that happening. The second thing to say is that you may have already picked up on this one, but we are anticipating the announcement of a multi-billion-pound energy project of national significance, possibly next month, which has the potential for bringing thousands of jobs to the South Tees site. Again, this won't happen immediately because there'll be lots of things to happen, not least of which with planning and construction, so any new jobs could be some time off. But again, positive news. And then thirdly, we obviously continue the negotiations to secure ownership of the SSI site, which is obviously the key to unlocking all these projects, because if you don't own the land, then it's very difficult to do anything about it. And again, this work is progressing well, and I'm very hopeful that an end might be in sight to that particular saga as well. So there's some positive progress happening that I really wanted to tell you about. So really, we've got an unemployment problem still. We are doing what we can to generate new jobs, but a bit of a time lag on that. But what is most important is when those jobs come, that we make sure local businesses benefit and they get them. And I'm pleased to say, co-chairing a working group of the Combined Authority, specifically looking at how we deliver for the majority of businesses in the Tees Valley to meet all their purchasing, supply and labour requirements locally. And that's a big challenge, but if we get to do it, then it means it will have a significant impact on our economy. So that was really all I wanted to say, but obviously associated with that is the work that we're already doing. And I have to say, hugely proud that our Business and Employment Growth team received the Best Service Delivery Model Award at the recent LGC Local Government Chronicle Awards for our work at the Grange Town Hub. And I think others are probably going to say more about that in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any announcements from Cabinet members, please?
You know, that was a political statement from the leader of the council. It was in the form, it would have been made a good election manifesto, so all you've achieved and you're going to achieve. So in that case, we, the opposition, should be able to challenge it and ask questions. And that's been the custom in the past.
That particular issue has been covered in the past. And while inverted commas, non-political statements from the leader were not allowed to be challenged, political statements were. So a precedent has actually been established. And it's up to the members to get up if they wish and have their two penneth.
I didn't see, political statements in there. I just thought factual updates, but sorry. Can you ask her afterwards? Thank you. We've got such a huge agenda to get through as well. Councillor Pallister? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Pallister.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am absolutely delighted to make this announcement and welcome Margie Oliver, the Council's Business Development Manager, Kim Jameson, Project Coordinator for the Training Hub, and Jack Cook, the apprentice who supports Kim and who I've watched grow so much over the last 6 months. Kim, the Training Hub Project Coordinator, absolutely shows real passion for the job and has been the driving force behind the early operational development of the project. Together, our Business and Employment Growth team has won the highly prestigious Local Government Best Service Delivery Model Award for the Training and Employment Hub in Grangetown. The team beat off competition from 8 other finalists to win the highly prestigious award, and the event in London was hosted by Channel 4 presenter Jon Snow. was attended by more than 1,000 of the most senior figures in British local government. The innovative hub in Grangetown was set up in February last year with a number of organisations, including MGT Teesside, which is building a renewable energy power station at Teesport, the Future Regeneration of Grangetown, Job Centre Plus, and other members of the working group. So far, nearly 2,000 have been helped. A total of 560 residents have been supported into employment and an estimated 1,400 into training. It's no surprise that we're now replicating this model in Skinning Grove to help people in East Cleveland into training and work. At the awards ceremony at Grosvenor House in London, judges said the commitment and enthusiasm of this winning team shone through, and their passionate and precise approach to engage local people. The project is a clear foundation that shows alignment of interest across both the business community and the wider community, and has delivered true local scale impact. This is outstanding work, and I'd now like to thank Margie, Kim and Jack and invite them to present the award to the Mayor on behalf of the Council. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any more announcements from Cabinet members? Councillor Hannaway.
Be an Ofsted inspection every week at the moment, and this one relates to the one on the 13th and 14th of March of our adult learning service, in which we retained our good rating. The letter we have from Ofsted says lots of positive things about our adult learning service. It says that learners and apprentices continue to receive a high-quality education. It says that leaders and managers have a good strategic vision, that we have a broad curriculum that meets the interests of the local community, and that we have a carefully considered approach to engaging with adults who live in the local authority's most deprived wards. There is one paragraph of criticism of us, though, and I'd like to read this out because it's very telling of the times we live in and all the government cuts. It says, leaders and managers have plans to reduce the number of publicly funded leisure courses from the start of the next academic year, and will convert them into courses for which learners pay fees to cover the full cost of delivering them. This decision will enable leaders and managers to focus more public funding on supporting learners taking formal qualifications to help them achieve their career goals. However, leaders and managers have been too slow to make this decision. How very old-fashioned of us, eh? How very off-message that we keep trying to hang on to publicly funded leisure courses in this time. Well, I'm quite proud that we try to hang on to publicly funded leisure courses, whatever the man from Ofsted says. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. If there's no more announcements from Cabinet members, are there any announcements from Chief Executive, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No announcements today. Thank you.
Okay, we've received no questions for the public for which notice has been given. So now we will go on to Councillor Lanigan to introduce the petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been asked to submit this on behalf of the people of Loftus Ward, the petition that has come into this council requesting an extra £2 million, £2 million of which has been costed by the officers of this council to kick the regeneration into the ward itself. I'm sure you've all looked at Appendix 2, well I hope you have, and read through that. The people of Loftus feel that the quest for this £2 million is adequate funding in order to take Loftus forward. We have at Loftus, as you know, that town, market town, proud market area that we have there has been in decline for many years now, and we need that in order to, we are part of Redcar and Cleveland. And before somebody comes back from the other side during this debate, Madam Mayor, and tells me that we've got problems with funding, can I just say that I've watched what's been going round in Redcar and Cleveland just lately. £5 million went into Redcar to regenerate. Extra money went in for SSI. I have SSI men in Loftus. We got very little help through there. When you did the Mask Stray into Redcar, you lifted all those paving slabs there, most of which were not damaged, to which this administration put them into skips. Can I explain to you that the Loftus ward does not have one paving slab that isn't broken in that town? This to me is an absolute waste of money. And there are things that this administration can do to help that town in Loftus. You are all well aware of the unemployment that we've got there. And at the last council meeting, one of the members said to me, well, you've been given £1 million. This £1 million is going to go absolutely nowhere. And in order for us to pick this town up, we need investment. That investment will pay back into this local authority. Once that investment is, we can start regenerating. And if we don't get this money from Redcar and Cleveland Council, we're just going to start to slide. We have put in for all sorts of funding that you're waiting for. And I need the backing of this council to say to us, we will find the money for Loftus and we will come in. That extra £1 million that you gave to Redcar, why? After all the millions of pounds that has been thrown in there, why did Redcar need an extra £1 million? Why didn't you share that out between Eston and Loftus? Then at least one of my buildings could have come down. The problems that we've got on the Loftus High Street, all those derelict buildings are in private ownership. And they know that we are pushing to try and get Loftus lifted. And so what have they done? They are sat there waiting. And the price of these buildings for us to take over is rocketing. The East Cleveland area that we've got, and I'm sure you're all well aware of the Klondike, and I would like to say now that the Economic Growth Department have helped us. However, I'm not going to thank Redcar and Cleveland Council for that. That is being run by funding that we have provided, and although Redcar and Cleveland Council have helped us, £70,000 went into Redcar for the thrift. £70,000 didn't come into East Cleveland to help us with the Klondike race. And this is unfair. And it's unfair that whatever money we have, you are basing this on Redcar. And you are leaving Loftus and the East Cleveland area just to try and jug along as it can. Well, it can't. And the people there, we pay our rates. We do whatever we can, but we can't do that on our own. And we need the help from this council. And I am asking you, on behalf of the people of Loftus, for us to sit down and see where we can generate some extra money.
Can you sum up, please, Councillor Lanigan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have a lot of very passionate people We had the Saxon Princess at Loftus, that I'm quite sure you're all aware. Where is it? It's at Redcar. We could have put Loftus on the map there. The Saxon Princess belongs to Loftus. It doesn't belong to Kirkleatham. We could have had a centre there that would have brought the visitors in and actually lifted that area. And you can't just keep taking and taking offers without us starting to hit back. And I'm quite sure that a lot of people here, I'm sure you do, that you must care. You can't just care about the executive areas that you've got. You have to spread what little wealth we've got across the borough. And that extends to Loftus and East Cleveland. We are fighting the best way we can, and the villages are fighting, but we need some help. And I want some reassurance from this administration today that we're going to sit down and look at this and see what we can do to help. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Norton, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, can I thank the petitioner for garnering the signatures and thus the interest of the people of Loftus into the problems that Councillor Lanigan raises. And I would also thank Councillor Lanigan for presenting the petition to Council and recognise the passion that she puts into her delivery. I'm reminded, Councillor Lanigan, of some of your issues following a walkabout that I did with the ward councillors and some of the community leaders in Loftus, and yes, it has its problems. Of that there is no doubt, and I wouldn't walk away from that. But I recognise, of course, that there isn't a ward in this borough, perhaps, that doesn't have its problems in that respect. But I want to address the petition, if I may, which in turn will deal with some of the issues that Councillor Lanigan raised. In relation to housing, I can say that in the past, house building in Loftus perhaps has not been without its challenges. But I can now say that the Rosecroft site in Loftus has received expressions of interest, including that of a national private house builder and potentially social landlords. The council is in discussion with developers for the Handale Primary and Rosecroft school sites, and that officers are also working with Coast and Country with a view to bringing forward the vacant sites on the Homicide development. So a little bit of good news in relation to the housing. On the matter of the High Street, I well recall the very first time I stood up as a portfolio holder for economic growth. I responded to a question, I think, from Councillor Turner on the High Street of Redcar, and I made the point then that, you know, the High Street as we know it is gone, and I think I referred to it then as perhaps we should recall them Memory Lane. I did a quick check on retail sales, and the latest information is that by 2030 e-sales will account for 40% of all UK sales. We've also seen the decline of out-of-town retailers, the loss of Maplin's and Toys R Us, perhaps a temperature gauge as to where out-of-town centres are going, especially as they too are challenged by e-sales. So I can't subscribe anymore to the narrative that out-of-town retailers are destroying the town centres and the high streets. In fact, what has to happen, and I said it the last time I spoke on the high street, we have to reconsider the high street model. And that model, perhaps, is one that used to exist just slightly before my time in Victorian period, when retailers and housing lived side by side, if not on top of each other, when the guy who ran the shop lived above the shop, as it were. So I think it's right that we do whatever we can to provide a better mix on the high street in relation to residences and indeed to businesses. We have identified in the East Cleveland Growth Plan the initiatives, the Sustainable High Street, Bring Your Business To, and the Secure Towns initiatives. And I'm sure all of these, that acting in concert with each other, will help to regenerate the high street, not only in Loftus, but I don't know of any town in any ward that is not suffering at the high street. And I have to say that it doesn't lay at the door of this council. It lays at the door of the way that people want these days to shop. Quite modern. On tourism, I absolutely share the petitioner's view that Loftus is in fact a gateway to the North Yorkshire Moors and beyond, and that's not lost on me. And perhaps there's some merit in looking at the Gisborough Gateway project model for funding a similar project in Loftus. And I know I sit on the periphery of that and see the councillors working away and the amount of money that they're generating to open up that gateway. The Grinkle Park Hotel, which is mentioned by the petitioner, of 60 woodland cottages and lodges, will clearly add to the tourism and the economic growth in Loftus. I acknowledge the very successful Klondike race and the Scarecrow Festival. It did frighten me once when I travelled through the villages and I thought, what the heck's going on? And I realised it was the Scarecrow Festival. And they place Loftus firmly on the tourist map. The Klondike race, I think, above all particularly, and you're to be congratulated for that. I do agree, absolutely, that the appeal of the high street has got to be looked at. It has to be aesthetically pleasing. And above all, it's got to have a car park. You know, it's patently obvious that people won't, well, probably do park on double lanes and on the street, but we need some sort of facility that gives you a car park in Loftus. And I'm right behind you doing that. The residents make a request for some £2 million to kickstart the overdue regeneration of Loftus. Well, Loftus, as with all other wards in this borough, has had and continues to receive capital investment. Perhaps not on the scale of £1 million a time, but they've certainly had their tens of thousands invested through the public realm. The East Cleveland Growth Plan, I think, is a platform that we can use to improve Loftus and the surrounding area. And I want to give the members of Loftus, and indeed any member in this chamber, my absolute commitment to working with them to see what the area growth plans will deliver for their area. Where they lack sufficiency, then we will work to see if we can improve that sufficiency. Where they have obstacles, then we'll work to remove them or climb over them, whatever is necessary. Councillor Lanigan, the people of Loftus, you have my commitment to work with you and other members of the community to improve your lot.
Thank you, Councillor Norton. Bearing in mind the heavy agenda, could I please respectfully request that everybody keeps everything as succinctly as possible so we can get through as much business as possible. We'll now open the floor to debate. Councillor Davies, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Loftus Ward and East Cleveland in general have been badly let down by Labour in local government for over 30 years. But don't take my word for it. The Gazette ran a story in the last couple of weeks claiming that rural voters held the keys to power in this chamber, highlighting the lack of political will by local Labour politicians to cater for the many, not the few, urban areas they currently monopolise. With that in mind, you would envisage support from the other side in dealing with this proactively. And credit to Councillor Bob Norton, who I agree with a lot of what he said, and who has at least paid lip service to our cause and was involved with the Barclays bank closure, of which I thank him for that. He also visited Loftus with a few of us and site visit down the town and looked at its opportunities. For those who don't know, we have an excellent army of volunteers and groups and stakeholders in Loftus, such as Loftus Accord, Temperance Square Business Forum, Friends of Loftus Library, the Community Forum, Loftus Accord Walking Group, who recently won a Mayor's Community Achievement Award, and also partners such as Loftus Town Council, who are proactively engaging with us as the Borough Council to work in partnership going forward. Denise Nesbitt, who I know the leader met just last week, to discuss potential for a new social enterprise in the town, targeting business and enterprise with self-regeneration sustainability ambitions paramount to us going forward. Along with the Homing the Saxon Princess exhibition on a permanent basis to promote our natural and historical heritage of which we are so rich in Loftus. Rural areas have long been the forgotten land on our CBC. We are equal council taxpayers to all the other areas, but less resourced. If Redcar and Cleveland are serious about its rural residents, then support this petition, work with us and fulfil Loftus Ward's potential in sustaining its own future. Jason Wharton, chair of the Temperance Square Business Forum, says, we have an opportunity for independent outlets to promote their goods and services. In the last 18 months, we have seen that high street towns benefit from its own, our high street towns benefit from its own chip shop, a beautician salon, a dance studio and a micro pub open all over the last few months. With additional investment from our CBC, we could upgrade some of the rundown buildings and attract new artisan and independent retailers, filling our units and opening up the towns for business, improving the housing market similar to Skelton's sudden rise in regeneration prospects of late. Next month, Loftus Townscape Heritage Bid will hopefully be successful. Many thanks to Darren Edmonds and his team for all his efforts to date. This council needs to deliver its best. Should we be unsuccessful, to pursue the dream of being a bold and ambitious, caring, respectful, regenerated and flourished town, keeping our community at the council's heart from now on and well into the future. I hope we get your support going forward. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Davies. Councillor Higgins, please.
Thank you very much. It would be very remiss of me not to speak on this petition, given that since 1996, Eston has been a forgotten community and could be aligned with Loftus. Where it says in the petition that there's not such a high street in decline, well, there has been in Eston for 20 odd years. This has happened because there has been, in this council, for many, many years, these areas have been sidelined by successive administrations who've concentrated on regeneration, new, but new isn't always best. And we've fought in Eston since 1996. That's why I'm still sat in this council chamber today. And that's why I got on the council. But it would be remiss of me not to point to a report in the annual monitoring report in 2008 and 9 from this council, where Councillor Lanigan was the portfolio forward for highways, transportation and planning. And she was a cabinet member for 4 years in the then Labour administration. There was two major pieces of work during them 4 years in that administration. There was the Leggy funding, the £10 million, which was there available in the first year for deprived communities, which was Eston and Grangedown South Bank and Loftus and East Cleveland areas. And this was for new businesses, struggling businesses, and anybody who needed support in anywhere. So the first year there was £2 million for the deprived areas, and then there was £8 million in the next 3 years. I supported my ward with this Leggy money. I went to see the officers, and I approached the businesses who got money to help with the shop fronts or any other way they needed help and support. Did Loftus get any of this funding? There was also another programme called Uplifting Our Town Centre Programme, and this report was published in the report which was signed off by Councillor Lanigan as the Cabinet Member. On page 71, it reports on Loftus District Centre, on Uplifting Our Town Centres, and it talks about improved to district centres in East Cleveland and Loftus. 6.81 gives a brief report on the status of Loftus High Street, what needs doing on Loftus High Street, including improved parking and that. And it also compares Eston with Loftus in the same position regarding the struggling High Street and the state of the High Streets. So it would be nice to know what actually was carried out in them 4 years by the Cabinet Member and the Labour administration. I've got the report here if anybody would like to see it later on. Surely this was an opportunity to start to raise the profile and support the people of Loftus from the very beginning. And am I surprised? No. Because what I'm going to say it now, as far as I'm concerned as a councillor, during that administration, in 2007, there was some very dark times indeed in this council. I experienced them myself, underhand, intimidating and bullying, and they're well documented by myself and also by some officers and people sat in this chamber today who just turned their heads in a blind eye and chose to ignore it. And I've got my chance to say it now in this council chamber. So where did the leggy money go? Did some go to Loftus and East Cleveland? What happened in the Uplifting now town centres for Loftus? As an Eston community, we've worked for 20 years against a negative culture from 1996, but we resolved a lot of the issues ourselves, the community. We've now got £1 million for the first time ever to work with and to be utilised. And it's a massive step forward for us. And it's a big start in these difficult times. We all want more money. Instead of, building barriers, we should all be working together for the betterment of all our communities on such issues like this.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Councillor Massey, please.
I think the first thing to say, like Councillor Norton said earlier on, is that we welcome the petition and we welcome the fact that today a number of our residents from Loftus, from our Member of Youth Parliament to residents in Mask, actively engaging in council business, and that can only be a good thing. And I do thank the petitioners for signing the petition and having such strong views about their area. I don't need to stand here and tell this council about the dire financial straits that this council and other local government authorities have been in over the last 7 or 8 years. But just as a quick reminder, £75 million cut over the last 7 years, £28 million to go. It's a difficult picture that we have to live with. Labour have reduced the debt of this council since 2015 from 171 million to just at the top end of 158 million. That's an achievement, but it's still a large debt for the residents of this borough to have to pay in future years. But it was only that decision that allowed us to make the decisions we made about the £5 million for the town centres, the £2 million for the industrial estates, and the £1 million for public realm. It was only through careful financial management that we enabled this council to take that decision to make some investments back into our communities. And as a quick reminder, Gisborough, Saltburn, Loftus, Eston and Redcar, none of those areas are dominant Labour areas. If Labour wanted to put that money into Labour towns, we'd have put it into South Bank, we'd have put it into Teesville. We didn't. We saw what was needed in the borough and we invested into those town centres that were crucial to secure the regeneration of our borough. Councillor Norton touched very briefly on capital spend, and by no means am I saying this is enough for the people of Loftus. But as a quick reminder for people, Loftus has had £2 million in each of the last 4 years, so £8 million overall for schools, but that's for schools and they should get that. I accept that. There's been between £50,000 and £100,000 every year out of revenue, but every ward should get that as well. But regarding capital spend, which Councillor Norton referenced, in 2017 to 18, Loftus had £285,000 spent from this capital budget. In 2016 to 17, it was £260,000. In 2015 to 16, it was £250,000. I'm not saying that's enough by any means, but you'll note that the years I've referenced there from 2015 through to 2018 are years of this Labour administration. The last record that we have before this administration, when Councillor Lanigan was in charge, £95,000 was spent in Loftus in the capital budget, a substantially less figure than we spent in the last 3 years of this. The £5 million scheme was intended to give the towns, such as Loftus, the opportunity to plan schemes and regenerate the centres. It was never intended as a blank cheque, as it wasn't for Labour in Eston, Labour anywhere. This was intended for everybody, everywhere, to try and access that funding. The Eston Moving Forward group, as Councillor Higgins referenced, we came up with schemes that ran up to £2 million, but we recognised the fact that £1 million is a step in the right direction. We're not asking for more. We want to see our £1 million spent before we start trying to plan other schemes. And I think the last thing I'd say is that it's crucial that if there are £2 million of schemes in Loftus, Councillor Norton has given you his assurance that we'll sit down and we'll discuss them, but we can't write a £2 million blank cheque. So when we see those schemes, we can certainly discuss it in future. I'm not by any means dismissing this petition. I'd just like to see the detail behind it.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Councillor Eric Jackson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, can I thank the people of Loftus for signing the petition and sending it in. But I'm sure myself and all councillors in here would like extra £2 million to go spent in their ward. But it just can't happen. We don't have that type of money. Loftus, along with other towns and areas, got £1 million for regeneration, and deservedly so. However, let's get that money spent well. If we spend that well and come forward a business case, I'm sure the portfolio holder would look at it favourably. Because this council wants all parts of the borough to thrive. Now, I'm just disappointed a lot of people there never mentioned anything about Loftus swimming baths. It's been there 30 years, and this council, twice it was going to close, it could have closed, but this council kept it open on 2 occasions. And also the Civic Trust, they did a regeneration scheme in Loftus, which this council supported. Lingbury Garth was built because of the Civic Trust, but nothing was mentioned of that. But I like to say, my sympathies with the petitioners, but it just can't happen like that. But I wish that Loftus well, and I hope we do get money in the future. And like I say, if we've got a good business case, I'm sure this council will look favourably on it.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Philip Thompson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, what the petitioner is requesting is that this authority gives its support to the principle of regenerating a town which we all know has extreme challenges. Now, no one's going to write a blank cheque for £2 million. However, I am sure that if the residents of Loftus are prepared to come up with some detailed, well thought out strategies, the money can be found. If there is a will, I'm sure that we collectively can seek to find the resources for that funding. Now, Loftus has been here for a long time, has it not? Referred to perhaps in the Doomsday Book. And not that any residents present in Loftus will remember that, but some are of some age. Some of them may remember something called the Lansbury Industrial Estate. Now, was that a white elephant, or was it just a contribution to the patchwork of efforts, perhaps ill-advised, to redevelop or refurbish a town dying on its feet? And if we can see that any program of works has to be properly thought out, and the strategy and rationalization for why they have merit well argued. Now, Loftus does have lots going for it, and I can hear that the Saxon Princess might well have been rebedded in Loftus to their benefit. I can understand that. We certainly haven't capitalized upon it and maximized its potential by bringing it to Redcar. The High Street needs to be redeveloped, but I take on board very well what the portfolio holder has guided us to think about is the changing face of high streets. So we can't rebuild and put back all of the memories that people may have had of the 60s and 70s, and particularly the 70s when it was such a buoyant area. We've lost Skinning Grove Iron Company, have we not? Over 3,500 employees at its peak. We still have the creditable and shining light of a small works, which only has about 300 people employed in it now, but is a beacon in the world steel market. So there is still light there. We've lost Rosecroft School. What have we replaced it with? Not a lot, I feel. So there is great challenges still to face us all in East Cleveland in terms of secondary education. So there is work to be done there. And putting money in isn't necessarily going to be the answer, despite all the platitudes we hear about reduced funding. Money has a contribution to make, but it isn't at the end of the day the essence. So I look forward to schemes coming from Loftus. I will be at the forefront of anyone who can help to bring a change in focus of that town, which we all cherish in East Cleveland. So on behalf of certainly our members, we welcome every Godspeed to those who are championing the cause. And if there is one light that I already know about, and that is the Reformed choir at the church, which if you ever have the opportunity of listening to it, your spirits will be raised. So I ask them to be leading in raising the spirits of all of those in Loftus.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thanks for calling this, Madam Mayor. I'll be very brief. There are two areas, I think, where we always fall down. And the first one of that is sometimes downplaying the communities and the constituencies we represent. And I just hope we don't get into that syndrome that we downplay and denigrate our own constituencies and then blame other people for the perceived woes. And that is really not very helpful to anyone. Having said that, I think there is a tremendous spirit in Loftus. I've known Loftus for many, many years. I've represented it in the past. I know many friends of ours come from Loftus, and I know the huge spirit there is in the town. And the list of local organisations that Wayne referenced just now, I find is very credible. It's certainly, I think, probably more local bodies on the ground in Loftus than there may be in Skelton. And I think we need to recognise that they too have their contribution to play. I think there are, as you say, two areas. The first is obviously the high street. It's been a problem since the beginning of the century. It's been there because of effectively the shopping offer did not meet the offer that was made by the out-of-town supermarkets and the out-of-town warehouses. And now those warehouses and supermarkets themselves are threatened by e-shopping and by the internet. So we do have to look at the types of shops that we can use and the kinds of activities that can go into those shops. And Bob's outlined many of them. We did have a similar problem actually in Skelton. Not, I would argue, not as severe, but still a problem. And we have actually had our own success story in the setting up of the Skelton Villages Improvement Group, which has centred its work on the improvement of the High Street in Skelton, which it did with Heritage Lottery funding money and match funding from this council. And that body is now busily transforming the High Street back to what it was perhaps 10, 20, 30 years ago. Now, one offer I can make, I think, here is that though it is a voluntary body, and myself and fellow councillors do not sit on the shoulders of the staff there, that staff do have possibly valuable lessons and contributions that could help the people in Loftus and the work they're doing. And if they want me to, I'm quite happy to go back to the project to tell them perhaps to make contact with the ward councillors, to make contact with the local bodies. The second area is housing and jobs. Philip Thompson, I think, did make reference to the industries that are in the area. To those, could I also add TC Industries and Caterpillar, which are synonymous factories working from the products out of Skinning Grove Steelworks, and also Pill Jones in Carlin Howe, which is the only manufacturer of copper tuyeres for the steel industry in the world. People who work there on their passports as various as North Korea, Manchuria and Australia. Liverton Mines Industrial Estate, the council referred to that. It is not actually a dead duck. I went round it some months ago with the chair of the East Cleveland Employment and Training Group, and I have to say I was amazed to find that in that unit, almost all, I think it was only 2 empty units, every other one was occupied. It was actually a hive of industry. The second area is housing, and I think one area where we've got to try and close the chapter is to finish the work off on the old Westfield estate. And I've always had a long-term view that one thing that's needed there is, again, a positive mix of private and public housing on that estate, possibly with a pub, possibly with a couple of shops, but also, from perspective that I have as a cabinet member, to look to see whether we can get a similar supported housing complex, which means that elderly people or people who become disabled and who come from the Loftus area can actually live in a supported and comfortable environment in their own community. I think that would be very, very welcome, and it's something that certainly I'm talking to Ian and Claire and the other people, and Tracy and the other people at Coast and Country about. It's obviously a long way away, but I think it's something we can actually work towards if we have that degree of cooperation from all the agencies.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. There's 3 more speakers, and then hopefully we'll move on to the next item of the agenda. Councillor Sue Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Madam Mayor. I think a couple of things I wanted to say. The first thing is, if you play this back when you get the video, I know we all watch it avidly, don't we? But if you play it back, No, all right, we don't. No, don't think anybody does, really. But if you play it back and count how many initiatives we've talked about today that are going on in Loftus, I think we'll all be impressed, because that's always been my impression of Loftus. One of the first things I did when we took over this administration and I became leader was I did a tour of all the parish councils, and that included Loftus. And I went up to Loftus, and I've been up a number of times since, most recently last Friday, as you say, to look out and speak to and meet the people and to have that dialogue. And it was perfectly obvious to me right from the outset that Loftus is not the sort of place that is going to sit around and wait for itself to decline. That is not what it's about. Loftus is about doing stuff for itself, making a difference, investing in itself, and that's why all the groups are doing as well as they have. I met Denise the other day there, the lady who leads on the Scarecrow Initiative amongst a whole range of other things, and I was talking to her about Loftus Library. We had all sorts of concerns about Loftus Library and the fact that it wouldn't be able to succeed when we had to reduce the hours because of the cuts. The fact is there is a thriving Friends group there that is doing a range of work with Loftus Library that is turning it into an excellent hub for the community. I was talking to Lola in our social enterprise department not very long ago about the work that Councillor Davis is doing, specifically to look at how we can replace the bank and the post office and the butchers and the other things that have just gone, those key services, and how we can use social enterprise, the energy and commitment of local people supported by the council to develop social enterprise initiatives to enable those sorts of services to be re-established in the town centre. Absolutely crucial, and that's happening because the people in Loftus have thought about it. The Klondike, the Scarecrow Festival, a whole range of things. These are things that people have come up with because they care about their town. I mean, one of the first public meetings I went to was to the residents of the estate where the housing is. Sorry, what's it called? Is it Rosecroft? Rosecroft. Blimey, that was hard, wasn't it? Do you remember that one? Yeah, it was very hard, that one. But, you know, again, it was about passion and caring. And that's what this is about now when it comes to development in this council. This council cannot do it on our own. We've said in the development plans that we will, as far as possible, distribute the money well, not equally, because we don't do equally, because we identify priorities and we try and focus on priorities. But we try and ensure, we don't say that we can just do stuff to people. We say we will do stuff with people, and that's the way you get the best success. And that's what we'll do in Loftus, that's what we're doing in other places. And I hope that's what everyone in this council chamber, as councillors, want us to do and would hope that we would do. And I have every confidence that Loftus is going to be a successful community. I think it's a successful community now, but I think it can be an even more successful community in the future. And as everybody has said on this side, you know, we are very committed to working with you to see that happen.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Kerr, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, can I say that I support everything in the petition, absolutely, and everything Councillor Lanigan has said. I've been intrigued by the members of the Cabinet when they've spoken. Councillor Massey sounded more like George Osborne or Philip Hammond, bragging about how he's cut the borrowing and the debt of this council. So I don't know what Jeremy Corbyn will think about that. As far as Sue Jeffrey is concerned, she seems to have adopted David Cameron's big society, relying on the community to do everything for themselves. However, I'm going to praise Bob Norton because I think he's a genuine person who means what he says and that he will help Loftus. On top of that, he's got a sense of humour, which I like a lot. So well, he's got a better a subtle sense of humour like I have. So you know, but really, going back to what the kernel of what I want to say, in East Cleveland there are many mini Loftuses which never get a mention. We've heard Skelton and of course Loftus mentioned today. What about Lingdale? What about Boosbeck? What about Broughton? What about Margrove Park? What about Chartons? What about Carlin Howe? What about these places? The mini Loftuses. Everything Councillor Lanigan has said about Loftus applies to them as well. So you've got a massive task. If you're going to do something for Loftus, we'll be crying out, do the same for us. I do think, I know Redcar's run down and it's got a lot of problems, but it's now getting a second bite of the cherry. Under George Dunning, we got the magnificent Redcar beacon. I went into it the other day when I went to see the petrified forest. The petrified forest was in a better state than the beacon. It's just becoming dilapidated, run down. I went into the gents. You didn't tick me off this time as I went in to get the numbers up. You know, there was plaster falling off the walls, and there was nobody going up and down the thing. You know, anyway, that's beside the point. Redcar is now getting another massive injection. Now, if you're talking about equality and sharing the money and doing something here, there, and everywhere, Redcar can't always be the priority. Sometimes, has East Cleveland ever been the priority? Never. It's time we looked at East Cleveland more seriously, Loftus plus the smaller villages. I mean, we've got the public realm, yes, it's a bonus, a small bonus, but it does not compensate for the major development you're talking about in the urban areas. And I still have to say it, I've said it again, the Labour Party is too urban and you need to get rural.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Final speaker, Councillor Margaret Wilson, please.
I feel terrible being the last one to speak. Mine is really a bit about me and a bit about what I think about Loftus. I first went to Loftus when I was at school and had some friends there. And believe you me, I don't know whether maybe one or two councillors will remember what it was like then, but now it's nothing like it was going back a number of years. I go there regularly now because I use the optician, and I'll put a plug in for the optician. He's one of the best in the area, so everybody in East Cleveland should go and use him. And he's like an oasis in a desert. That particular part of Loftus, which is near the traffic lights in the centre, that must be one of the most deprived areas in the borough, and I don't know how anybody can argue otherwise. And he's one lovely shop in the middle of all this absolute dereliction. I also worked in Loftus. I used to go around Tees Valley, and I had a session in Loftus, and that's going back 15 years more, and it was horrible then. So it hasn't changed or improved in 15, 20 years. It started to go wrong in the 1970s, which is a lot longer than somebody's mentioned. So I support the petition, absolutely 100%. I just wanted to say that as far as some of the ancient things that you could promote Loftus with, there is one of the oldest woods in England in Loftus, and Cromwell is purported to have slept in a house there, which is clearly marked, and Henry VIII visited Loftus regularly to go hunting in Handale Forest. Handale Abbey had an ancient orchard which this council very thoughtfully chopped down, and there's nothing there now. I don't think there's anything else really, but I just wanted to say how I'd seen it deteriorate over a period of time, and we haven't helped Loftus at all. So I just hope that we can do from now. Thank you. Sorry it rambled, but that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'm sure the Cabinet member, Councillor Norton, will take on board all the discussions and feelings of members and the petition. And thank you, everyone, for participating in the debate. We'll now move on to item agenda 11 and over to Councillor Massey to introduce the motion.
With your permission, Madam Mayor, I'd like to invite our Member for Youth Parliament, who's Kellen Hadfield. Kellen submitted this motion to myself and Councillor Mason, and we'd like to invite Kellen to say a few words as he's formally submitted the motion to us two councillors, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Kellen, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor Mason and Councillor Matty for supporting the motion today. Last year, ADM 45 had support from 96 Liberal Democrat, Labour, SNP, Clyde Cymru, Green and Conservative MPs, but was blocked. It's set to resume on the 11th of May this year. Previously, the Youth Parliament, which has been running longer than I've been alive, named Votes at 16 as its national campaign for 2018. 20,000 young people are involved in local youth councils. 85% of secondary schools elect some form of student voice, and it has become party policy for most major political parties. Locally, we've had an NYP since 2008 and have balloted our young people through Make Your Mark for the past 3 years, where this year we're 5th in the country. 1 out of 10, or 500, of our young people named this campaign as their #1 priority. Today, Councillor Massey and Councillor Mason's motion would see us follow the likes of Kent, Oldham, Manchester and Oxford councils in endorsing the right to vote for 16 and 17-year-olds, of whom there are 1.5 million nationally. And surely, as a forward-thinking council I believe we are, this is something we should get behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelton, and thanks for all your hard work in the local area as our Member of Youth Parliament. Over to Councillor Massey to introduce the motion.
Yes, thank you to Kelton and thank you, Madam Mayor, for allowing Kelton to speak. I think, like I said about the Loftus petition, it's so exciting to have people from members of the public and, you know, a member of office as the Member of Youth Parliament come and present things to this council, because that's what their role is as members of the public and as a member of the Youth Parliament. And I think it shows that, you know, the eloquence with which Kelton spoke there shows that whether somebody's the age of 16 or 60, they have a right to be involved in our political process. At the age of 16, you can, and I have to look this up because it's been a while and I had long hair, give full consent to medical treatment, work full-time, pay income tax and national insurance, obtain tax credits and benefits, consent to sexual relationships, get married with your parents' consent, serve in the armed forces, be a company director, change your name, do the national lottery, get a passport. You can do all those things and you can't vote and you can't stand for election, which I think is an absolute farce. 16 and 17-year-olds in this country are denied the chance to influence decisions made by politicians which massively impact their lives at 16 and 17-year-old adults. Young people are often ignored, whether that's on tuition fees, whether it's on the living wage, whether it's on youth services, a decision this council makes. Their decisions are not necessarily heard by people because they're not allowed to vote and they're not allowed to stand for election. We need to bring equality across the UK on votes at 16 and 17. Scotland have moved a bit in this direction. Kelton has identified that there's been some motions in Parliament, but this is the policy of 2 of the major political parties in this country, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. And I'm incredibly grateful for Josh for suggesting that we move and second this motion across party lines, which I think is a very rare occurrence in this council. This is not particularly, to me, a political issue. It's an issue of common sense. Any man or woman who speaks as eloquently as Kelton does and has the rights that he does as a 16-year-old should be allowed to vote in this country, within this council, etc. So I move that Redcar and Cleveland Council supports the full enfranchisement of 16 and 17-year-olds into the political system and supports the National Vote to 16 campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Do you have a seconder?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I second the motion, and I will speak on it right away. If Kelton isn't the perfect advert and exemplar for the suitability of extending the franchise to 16-year-olds, then, frankly, Madam Mayor, I don't know what is. I do think it's interesting that on the same day that this council is going to celebrate the extension of the franchise to men and to some women 100 years ago, that we should be discussing today a further extension of that democratic process, in this instance to young people. And the reason I have been so keen to support Kelton, our Member of the Youth Parliament, is because I think that this Votes at 16 campaign highlights one of the most serious flaws of our parliamentary democracy. When my stepfather turned 60, he decided that he'd had enough of sitting in traffic on his morning commute. So he resolved to make use of his allocated free bus pass, enabling him to read a novel on his way to and from his laboratory rather than staring bleakly at the car in front of him. He did so with the full pay of the job that he had held for many years. But on that same bus, Madam Mayor, were young people travelling to college or their part-time jobs, single parents going to work in order to be able to feed their families, men and women making trips to the job centre or the health centre or the local Sure Start centre. The difference between them and my stepfather was that they had to pay for their journey. Now, forgive me if this is beginning to sound like a crusade against non-means-tested universal benefits for pensioners. It is, in fact, nothing of the kind. But in my view, this policy, this bus pass policy, typifies the propensity of all political parties to tailor their electoral commitments to those most likely to vote en masse. The casualty of this is younger people, those from disadvantaged and low economy backgrounds who feel less engaged by a political system which is not in tune with their needs. That is why I believe it is so important to energize young people in politics, so that it's no longer a minority sport enjoyed by retirees, but a diverse and engaging opportunity for young people to contribute and make a difference. Of course, this simply can't be achieved by handing out the vote willy-nilly, but it must be supported with a solid national curriculum commitment to equipping young people with the knowledge they need to fully engage with the political system, to remove the inherent bias of politicians towards Middle England, and to be the future drivers of social mobility, tolerance and fairness. I commend the motion, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Kerr, please.
Well, I think I'll be one of the few who will be opposing this. Can I, congratulate Callum for coming here today. He is an exemplar, but I think he's probably at the top of the pyramid as far as that is concerned amongst people of that age. This is a political alliance between Labour and the Liberals, who are taking advantage of this because they believe, probably rightly, that if 16-year-olds got the vote, they would do better in elections. Just as, I forgot what she's called now, that Scottish nationalist lady thought the same thing in Scotland, and therefore she brought, she's a fish of some sort, isn't she? What's she called? Tell me. Sturgeon, that's right. Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon. That's why she did that in Scotland, to give her party a greater advantage. Now, I think that rather than lower the voting age, we should be raising the age for these other aspects which are listed under the fourth bullet point. To pay tax, that's just a nonsense. A newborn baby is liable to pay tax, so it doesn't really come into it. I don't think anybody under 18 should be working full-time. I don't think anybody under 18 should be risking their lives in the armed forces. We should be driving these things up rather than the voting age down. The voting age, within living memory, I don't quite know when it was, used to be 21. Now, then it went to 18. This is in I think it's since I've been on this council, or at least longer. Then it went down to 18. Now, then it's going to 16. What's going to happen next? Every kid in a secondary school will be getting the vote. It's just a never-ending reduction in this franchise. By the way, you're all you were supposed to be celebrating, I don't know whether we're going to hear it or not, women's suffrage. Can I point out that in 1918, I'm not advocating this, by the way, before I'm misquoted, that women didn't get the vote till 30 in 1918. So I believe we've got it right at 18. I think it's a rite of passage. I think 18 should be the rite of passage, probably for driving as well, and perhaps even for getting married. It should be the same age for everything. I think 18 is appropriate. We used to have 21st birthday parties, now we have 18th birthday parties. So let's have a bit of common sense. 18, it's only 2 more years after all. Let's not resort to politics on this. Let's be sensible and keep the age as it is.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep it short. The news every day is full of bad press about youths. It's all the 15s and such like, and it's every day. And now the killings and the weapons and everything. Every day I hear someone say, "Bring back conscription." We're all having a moan about everything. I joined the army on boy service, and it didn't do me any harm in my life. And I respect the young gentleman, and something like this might bring other people to look, young people, to have someone to look up to and maybe change their mind about things. So, political or not, I'm going to support the motion because I have a lot of respect for the young man, and I think he's doing a good thing, and he's come here and spoke, and he'll get my respect for it. I'm sorry if he doesn't agree with people, but that's how it's going. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hunt. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hear what our young speaker said, and I've listened to everyone else, and I agree with most of what has been said. My only problem is with the age, which is the key to this. Children, and I believe they are still children at 16 and 17 years old, they're still in education, they're still completing their education, they're very impressionable, they're learning about the world, they're learning about relationships, and there's an awful lot of learning to do at that age. I think, many years ago, I worked with some youth offenders, young offenders, and we talked to them about would they like to vote. They were 15, 16, 17 years old. And they all unanimously said no. They didn't feel they could take that responsibility. And I think we have to look at what this motion is asking for. We're allowing young, impressionable minds to decide which way this country goes. I know it's a country they're growing into, but I still don't feel, apart from a few very good exceptions, that we can expect that much of young children. I'm sorry, I can't support this motion.
Thank you. I rarely speak on motions as the Mayor, but I'm going to put my 2 pence in as to why I support this motion after listening to some of the comments made. At 16 years old, I was working full-time and I was living independently and I was paying taxes. I had no involvement from anybody else. When we're talking about children's minds, I think when Josh talked about education, it's our responsibility to teach children how to think and not what to think, and for them to make their own minds up. And it is not a compulsory vote at 16. Nobody will be dragged to a polling booth between the ages of 16 and 18 kicking and screaming, and anyone who says, no, I don't want the vote, has the option not to. So for that reason, it will be why I'll be supporting Callan's motion. And on to Councillor Clark, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just want to clear a point up about joining the armed forces. I mean, I'm proud of my heritage of being a veteran now for 20 odd years and being serving him for 20 odd years. There's no way somebody at this age of 16 or 17 will go to a theatre of war, Madam Mayor. All right? They'll either be in an army apprentice college, junior section, or junior leaders, junior soldiers, but there's no way. If somebody, for example, is getting close to the age of 18, though, there's a chance that they could go to a theatre of war, but they'll be so far away from the action that there's no way that they'll be in front of the enemy. So I just want to clear that point, because it's important that people do understand that, no, when you're 16, you ain't going to be going to war. You ain't going to be going to go to war when you're 17, but possibly when you're 18, just before you're 18, yes, you could go to war, but there'll be a lot of provisos, though, to make sure that you're not on that front line until you are 18 or over, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, can I say that was excellently spoken and excellently presented, so well done. This is national policy for both the Lib Dems and Labour Party, and I respect that and I understand why. And I also respect a lot of the arguments that have been put across for this. The Youth Parliament does an excellent job, and every person in it, I would consider that they would consider the impact of their votes, they would understand what it meant, and they'd understand how important it was not to take that responsibility lightly. The truth is, though, the people within that Youth Parliament probably aren't your average 16 or 17-year-olds. I've got 3 sons. They're all over 20 now. The youngest is coming up 21. They've all got their own opinions. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they differ, but they're quite happy to engage in debate about a whole range of subjects. The one thing that unites all 3 of them, though, is at 16 and 17, they didn't care about politics. They weren't bothered, they weren't interested. They had far more important things to think about. School, holidays, clothes, bikes. Would they get a car when they were 17? What type of car would they like? Friends, football, rugby, girls. All of these things that encompass their young lives, they were allowed to enjoy and allowed to think about. They didn't want to consider politics. And I think they are normal, average, everyday 16 and 17-year-olds. And that's the crux of this, right? I had this debate with Councillor Brown at the back end of last year on social media. And we had different opinions. That was fair enough, we often do. And I offered to come down to his ward, which is where I grew up, and say, look, we'll walk the streets. We'll talk to whatever young people we find, and we'll ask them what their opinion on it is. That didn't happen, right? Through no fault of either of us, to be fair. But what I suspect we'd have found is what I find when I work with the NCS programme and the children and the young people that join those programmes and do some fantastic work within our communities. And every single programme I went to this summer, I asked the same question, right? Do you think 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote? And every single group I worked with voted to say that they didn't believe 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. And based on my experiences, Madam Mayor, I won't be supporting this motion today.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Councillor Turner's made it relatively easy for now. Anything he opposes, I'm going to be in favour of. What you were saying earlier on, Chair, demonstrated the point when you said that there was a real deep curriculum educational role for young people to understand what voting means and what politics about, obviously not in the party political term. So to dismiss young people because they've got other interests just shows we're not doing the educational job correctly as far as I'm concerned. And you know, there's been a couple of comments today about we're bringing politics into it, or this was a political statement. Well, I don't know about anybody else in this room. The only reason I'm here is because I'm a politician. The difference is some of us in this room are elected, the others aren't. But I'll tell you something, I've come across people that have never been elected to anything, are far more political than some of the people in this room. Politics is about life. Party politics is the way you actually approach these things. I could construct an argument for taking the voting age even lower if you wanted to do that. I actually think sometimes if more younger people had an influence on what some crazy adults are doing in this world, no names, no pack drill, but the President of the United States features in it somewhere, the place might be a safer and more pleasant place to actually live in. And Rye Hill School, take an example of a couple of schools and what they've done with consulting with young people. Rye Hill School, if you've ever been into it, has actually got rounded corners, which is quite unique in terms of an establishment anyway. And that was done because the young people themselves thought that would be a good idea to get around the issue of bullying. If you've got rounded corners, you can't suddenly jump up on somebody. Nobody else thought of that, and that was brought into the school. And in the days when school councils were really on the up, and there seems to have been a slide recently, and I hope Craig will bring them back again, Skelton Primary School pioneered consulting with 5-year-olds about what to do in school and actually adopted some of the ideas that they had there. In terms of political support, I'm not surprised again, given Councillor Turner's choice, since he's jumped ship from one ship to another, because the one he's in doesn't have a policy to support dropping the age from 18 to 16. The other political parties do. That only serves to demonstrate, as far as I'm concerned, they're just a bit more progressive than the Conservative Party, but that doesn't come as great news to any of us, does it? And on the very final point I'd like to make, in terms of perhaps Steve Kay's contribution, when you're talking about ages, you're talking about responsibilities. It is a fact the age of criminal responsibility in this country is 10. It's the lowest in the developed world. That should actually be going up, I would contend. But it's crazy to have an age of 10 in terms of criminal responsibility and not, for instance, to allow people to have votes at 16.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you very much indeed for calling us. I think the first point I want to make is I'm one of those odd people who left school. I left school at 15. I was working, I think I left the school on the Friday. I was at work on the Monday, and that was a different kind of environment in terms of the economic environment we were living in. I was living independently by the time I was 17. I never managed to get a vote until I think the local elections in 1970 in the area I was living in then, when the Labour government, and it was the Labour government, brought the voting age down to 18. The issue is a very simple one. It's extending a public and civic right to people who are affected by policies made in places like this. And if we look at the way that young people have been affected by policies in recent years, we don't have to look any further than the withdrawal of the educational maintenance allowance to students, the financial lifeline that kept many people from disadvantaged households in the college. Without the EMA, they would probably have to go back to their parents and look for second-rate training schemes instead of proper college or indeed at later years university education. Again, when I left school at 15, I could have, a couple of years on, and I only had one GCE, but I could actually then have applied later on to go and try O and A levels, and indeed possibly to think about university, because I would have known if I did that I would get a grant. We don't have that now, and that again affects people between 15, 16, 17 and 18. Their chances of wishing to go to university will be constrained by the cash environment they're going to be living in. It is, as I say, bringing that civic right to people. They don't have to exercise if they don't want to, as I think the Mayor said. It is there for them to use if they wish. And I think it would actually make a far better society if they did. And the argument that people are not interested in was demonstrated as absolutely false in the Scottish referendum, where many young people did vote, actively voted and participated. I'm supporting the resolution. I hope it goes through, and I look forward to seeing it publicised appropriately, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Orange. Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm one of the Liberal Democrats who have been sceptical about extending the vote to 16. I still remain sceptical about the future of our democracy as well. However, I've been listening to what Councillor Mason has said and other members of the Council, and I would hate to be associated with the reactionary people, councillors such as Councillor Kay and Turner, in voting against this. I think what is important is that this should be a step towards improving our democracy and improving fair voting within our voting system. Our political system needs radical reform urgently. I think some of the arguments that have been put forward by Councillor Turner and Councillor Kay and others would have been said as well. about extending the vote to those who are 18. I don't think it is a party political issue. I think it's about ensuring the future of our democracy, which is, I'm absolutely certain, under threat. I said, I think at the previous meeting, and I was delighted to get a round of applause for it, that we've got the worst government in my living memory in existence at the moment. And they will do nothing. One, to improve our, thank you very much again, thank you. They will do nothing to improve our democracy. They will do nothing to improve the lot of people in education. However, I must say this, I think that this type of reform should essentially be conditional on the point that is made in the paragraph about citizenship education. Perhaps we should have citizenship education for and economic education for the over 60s as well as the young people in this country too. Perhaps we would not have had then the Brexit vote that we've had. I think our education system needs a radical shake-up, and I think the citizenship education should actually start at 11. We can't afford to just do it when people might have the vote at 16. I've actually taught citizenship education at AS level in the past. I've taught politics at A level in the past. I've taught economics in the past. And I think it's important that we extend those sort of subjects to our young people who are in the secondary sector, not just the tertiary sector. What we are asking the young people to do, if we actually give them the vote at 16, is not only have the right to vote, but have the responsibility of taking part in our democracy. And I think that's an essential feature. This is not about politics, it's not about party politics. It just happens that we have a reactionary set of political parties called essentially the Conservative Party. It is about our democracy. It's about giving people the rights and responsibilities to exercise their vote in their country and to change and take part in the future of their country. So I think I'm going to be voting for this after years and years of skepticism about votes at 16, because I've actually taught the people at 16. And I've taught probably quite a large number over the years. And I think once you do start to teach them about citizenship, once you do start to teach them about the economic realities of the world, and once you do start to teach them about the political realities of our democracy, then they are prepared to take responsibility and exercise the rights properly.
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. I do believe Kellen does have somewhere else to go, so we've got 4 more lights on, if we can and I'll draw the line under that. Councillor Sue Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of things from me. I think I quite like Councillor Mason's minority support for retirees. I think that's an excellent suggestion, but perhaps quite descriptive really of what we do sometimes here, and something that absolutely needs to change. I also think that Councillor Nightingale's point about democracy under threat is a very real one. I think it's not just democracy under threat now in terms of who we've got, but it's about actually motivating the people who are currently able to vote, because there are so many people, particularly in my ward, who actually don't go out and vote at all. And I mean, if you looked at the recent by-election, what was it, a 20-odd% turnout? Very, very low. We definitely need to do something to revitalise our democracy. But as far as young people are concerned, as far as votes for 16 are concerned, the fact is that for any other walk of life, we would be all collectively saying that there should be as diverse a representation as possible in any decision that is made about the future of this borough, or indeed the future of this country. Diversity, as far as I'm concerned, also includes age. When we make decisions about the future. It is nonsense to exclude from those decisions people whose future is going to be affected by those decisions. And I think you only had to be in the session that we were in this afternoon, where we were talking about Facebook and Snapchat and all those sorts of things. You know, I'm sure many of you in this room may well be up to speed on all of that. I know I'm not. I know it's all really fast moving. And the fact is, if we don't have people taking the decision to actually understand how some of these fast-moving agendas are going to impact on their lives going forward, then how can we possibly expect to make good decisions? So I think this is just a sensible idea, you know, I cannot understand why anybody would not support it.
Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Eyre, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So let's not talk about 17, 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds being impressionable by the so-called well-known adult. And 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds always take notice of it there, whatever. So next year, many of us in this chamber there will be door knocking. And you'll be campaigning, you know, that to vote for yourself. Many of these people that you knock on the door, it's the first time you've seen them. First time they've seen you. But the way that you put it over to them, you may impress them and they will vote for you. That is just the same as what you would do there with the 16 and 17-year-old. So let's not talk. And as far as being impressionable, well, we've only got to go back there to the Brexit referendum. The vast majority, I would say that 90% of people who voted in that Brexit referendum hadn't got a clue of what they were voting for, whether it was for or against it. The only knowledge that they had, and it was a lack of knowledge, information, came from the leading politicians, whether for or against it, but there was very little in depth of the benefits of staying in or the benefits of coming out. The vast majority of the population voted because they were impressed by the few words that this politician or that politician had said. We were impressed for it. And that's the way that they voted. And by hell, what a mess we've ended up in it, haven't we? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Teasdale, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hadn't intended speaking on this motion. And I, like Councillor Nightingale, have grave concerns about this motion, or had grave concerns about this motion. I'm very impressed with Colin. I've known Colin for a number of years through the church at Gisborough, and he knows two of my grandchildren who both attend Lawrence Jackson School and are very switched on in what's happening, and can certainly put me to shame sometimes in arguments that they can present on a generally non-political nature, but sometimes it does sway into that. I have quite a lot to do, and have had quite a lot to do with young people over the years, principally through my connections with the church, and more recently with the involvement of Lawrence Jackson pupils on the Town Hall Gateway project, where they have been embraced and are an important part of what we do. And they are 14 and 15-year-olds, I think, calendar in year 10 when they come to us. Yeah. I might be classed as a wrinkly now because of my age, but I do support youth. I do appreciate the intelligence of youth, which sometimes wasn't there years ago because of the lack of educational opportunities. I agree with Councillor Mason that if this vote does become national policy, there needs to be something in the curriculum to teach all people coming up to voting age about citizenship, about what, if they vote, what they might be voting for and what the implications might be. I might be a surprise to colleagues across the chamber. I am going to vote for this motion because I feel that youth do need a voice. Whether it's a full voice or whether it's a partial voice to start with remains to be seen. But I'm not going to be tied by any political considerations. I will vote. I still have concerns, as I'm sure Councillor Nightingale has, but I am persuaded to vote for this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Teasdale. Final speaker, Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't specifically going to speak. However, I'm that impressed with Callum, the way he presented, and the maturity you've shown in the way you've moved the motion, and also Councillor Turner, that I was inclined to come in. For me, I also have two sons, a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. The 16-year-old kept me awake till 3 o'clock this morning, worried about an assessment he's got at Prior College coming up to do with torturable law. I had absolutely no idea what he was saying to me. It was way above my head. So, you know, age is certainly not a barometer of maturity or intelligence. But my point is he's highly engaged with politics, and he'll tell me off all the time about what he thinks is wrong with the Labour Party. So if he gets a vote, he'll probably vote against me. But, you know, but I certainly don't want to take that away from him. I think it's important, like Councillor Turner mentioned, yes, you are right, Councillor Turner. Many people in Dormanstown, young people, just don't care. They're totally disengaged with the establishment. You know, they rebel against it. You know, one of the ways that we look at increases of antisocial behaviour, you know, they rebel against it, just not interested in the slightest. Surely this motion is about engaging young people, you know, for the future, to change that mindset where they're totally disengaged. So for me, it's got nothing to do with the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats getting more votes. It's just an easy motion for me to support. Well done, Callum.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Massey, can you briefly sum up for us, please?
Yes, thanks for everyone who spoke in the debate, and special thanks to Callum for bringing it again. I think that too often we try and represent the views of our public without necessarily listening to them. We've heard a very eloquent 16-year-old man today come and express the strong views of not only himself, but the people he goes to college with, the youth parliament nationally, and I think it's been very persuasive. Like Councillor Nightingale, I've taught 16-year-old adults. I've taught all of that as well, and some of the 16-year-old adults I've taught knew more about politics than the 20-year-old adults I teach now. Age is not a barometer of everything, and you might be very engaged at 16, you might not, but you also might be very engaged at 50, or you might not. How many people over the age of 50 don't vote? How many people over the age of 20 don't vote? It's quite a lot. And I think having that experience with dealing with people who are maybe 16 to 18 or 16 to 21 is vital to our understanding. And I think it's absolutely key that the Conservative Party don't have this as a national policy, and other parties, largely speaking, do. But that does not mean that every Conservative is against this by any means. And I think that the best fact you can give about this is 2 Tory education secretaries, ex-education secretaries, are in favour of this, Justin Green and Nicky Morgan. What does that tell you? They've worked with 16-year-olds. That's exactly what that tells you, and they're in favour of this. In the 1950s, 3% of the population went to university. Now it's over 50%. That tells you that the world has changed and we need to change with it. And I think as a council, we need to make a stand today and say that we support the 16 and 17-year-olds of this borough. We want them to be able to stand for election. We want them to be able to vote in those elections. I endorse my own motion.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? All those against, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That motion's carried. Well done, Callum. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to the next item of the agenda, which is item 13, and it's questions from members of the council. So, Councillor Wilson, please.
My question is for Councillor Jeffrey, Leader of the Council. Will the Leader of the Council reaffirm her commitment made at a recent public meeting for the Council to support residents in their efforts to find an alternative solution to the current traffic restriction proposals for Mask High Street?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Am I competing with the photography? That's okay. Did everybody hear Councillor Wilson's question?
Do you want to hear the question?
Do you want to
ask it again? Sorry, Councillor Wilson, I didn't realise they were doing the photo. Would you like to ask your question again? Sorry.
You will be. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Jeffrey, will the Leader of the Council reaffirm her commitment made at a recent public meeting for the Council to support residents in their efforts to find an alternative solution to the current traffic restriction proposals for Mask High Street?
And Councillor Wilson for the question. Can I say, first of all, quite clearly, yes, I am very happy indeed to do that. And in doing so, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank the ward councillors who have and are working hard to resolve this issue. And I know you, Madam Mayor, yourself have been very closely involved in what's been going on. I also want to thank the residents group, not only for articulating so clearly the problems that the current proposal will cause, but also being prepared to work with us to find alternative solutions and giving their time voluntarily. So thank you very much indeed, and a representative is up there. I have to say that we had our first meeting of the working group this week, and I was really pleased to receive a note from Peter from the action group thanking us for a successful and productive meeting. And that is certainly the way that we expect to go on. And there's no guarantees about finding a solution here that will work, but we're certainly going to do our best to make sure that we do. So just for the purposes of the record and to confirm our joint statement, I'm going to just read it out, Madam Mayor, okay? So the joint statement is, the proposed traffic scheme was not the Council's preferred option, but does form part of the planning permission, which was approved on appeal by the Secretary of State. In view of the strength of public opinion against this scheme, it is clear that there is a case for examining other workable solutions. The Council commits to providing full support to any future lobbying of landowners, developers or builders by residents to secure agreement to any revised scheme before works are implemented. Okay, that's the statement.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Wilson? Thank you. Okay, finally on to the original order of the agenda. As you know, we've still got a lot to get through. So, and we're on to the motions which were deferred from the last council meeting. So, first motion is moved by Councillor Sue Jeffrey.
Councillor Pallister's actually moving and I'm seconding.
Councillor Pallister.
We've all witnessed the rise in food banks both locally and nationally. The Trussell Trust Food Bank Network provided 1.2 million emergency food bank supplies in 2017. The Trussell Trust are also reporting that many women and young girls are having to choose between buying food, fuel, and struggling to pay for sanitary products. Women do not have a choice whether to have a period or not. For a family where there is a mother and two daughters living in the same household who have periods, the average cost per month of buying sanitary products is £9. In the council papers it does say £20, but if you really want to look for the cheapest, it would be around £9, so I've actually put that in. However, that can still be too much when you're deciding whether or not you want to keep the house warm, food for the children and yourself, or buy sanitary products. We will shortly be carrying out a survey across the Tees Valley to determine the scale of the problem. But what we do know in a recent survey by Plan International UK, it was found that from 1,000 girls interviewed aged 14 to 24 years, 10% had been unable to buy sanitary products and that some girls were missing out on education. Scotland are leading the way in piloting a scheme in Aberdeen where women can have an S card similar to the C card scheme for condoms. The S card enables a woman to go into a pharmacy in exchange for free sanitary products. Some food banks and community hubs may have sanitary products that women can access, but these are not open 7 days a week. There needs to be a system where young girls and women in need can easily access free sanitary products to meet a basic need, maintain dignity and hygiene. Can I move to the Council that no women and girls in Redcar and Cleveland should be forced into poverty due to her periods? No woman should miss work or college because of a period, and no girl should miss school because of her period. And that this Council pledges its full support for the Tees Valley Free Period campaign, and that further work to explore how a similar scheme to Scotland would operate and be funded in Redcar and Cleveland. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hollister.
I'll second that, Madam Mayor. I just want to make a couple of comments. I think my first one is that isn't it pretty disgusting that we're having to discuss this in this day and age, the fact that some, and well, many women across the Tees Valley cannot afford sanitary products and indeed have to make choices about whether they feed their family or whether they buy those products. And I think that's just says it all, if you like. We talk about these things in the abstract on many occasions, but if you're a woman who's in those circumstances, then you just know how it affects your life. It affects your confidence, it affects your ability to go about and do your business, and it affects just basically your self-esteem. And that's an appalling situation to put our women into. We already know that women across the Tees Valley, many of them who are poor, have difficulties in terms of aspirations, in terms of believing in themselves and what they can do. And if they have a circumstance where they cannot even afford to buy sanitary protection to ensure that once a month they aren't in a position where they feel in some way that they can't go out and carry on their lives in a normal way, that's just absolutely appalling. This is a Tees-wide campaign. It's been started by colleagues in Middlesbrough, and it is a reaction to a real life problem that is happening now in our communities. And I do hope that everybody here will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Ovens, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wholeheartedly support this. As a mum of 4 daughters, if I hadn't been able to provide what they needed, I would have been absolutely so embarrassed, I would have been mortified. Fortunately, I wasn't in that position. I don't want to see anyone else in that position. I don't want to hear of people having to use the wrong products and go back to the days of my gran and my mum who recalled stories of oiling the rags. And I said, did you get your own rag back? And they said, no, not necessarily. So we're almost regressing to that. So I don't want to see any woman or young girl marginalised or excluded simply because of their gender. And I wholeheartedly support a similar scheme to a C card. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ovens. Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, of course, the backdrop to this is poverty, isn't it? As it says in the introductory paragraph, or alludes to the rise of food banks across the country, welfare, so-called welfare reform, and the rollout of universal credit, the full impact and horrors of which will be unleashed in November of this year, as far as this authority is concerned, and all the indications are things are going to get significantly worse before they get better. And I'd just like to quote some statistics from the latest report from the National Children's Bureau, actually based on government figures, so we have to take them as accurate, I would suggest, which tells us that the households below average income figures for the last year show that children living in the most vulnerable households are facing the highest rises in poverty. And just going back to a presentation we had earlier today about mental health issues and how to address them, there is a question, isn't there, given the additional impact on families over the coming years, precisely how that might impact in terms of families and individuals. Child poverty is now up to 4.1 million as opposed to 3.6 in 2010. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission recent report suggests by 2022 that will rise further to 5.6 million given present trajectories. And it's larger families that are more vulnerable to the adverse impact of these increases in poverty. If you happen to be of Pakistani or Bangladeshi origin, the rises are in the order of 54% and 60%, quite dramatic and unacceptable rises in child poverty. And the End Child Poverty Coalition, which is a group of well over 100 charities and civic bodies, are calling for an end to the freezing child benefits and the lifting of the 2-child limit, which some of you may be familiar with. In the 21st century, we've actually got a government in the developed world which imposes restrictions on support for children beyond 2. And as recently as this week, there's been a debate amongst ministers how they're going to cope with the situation if a woman has a child following a rape. They still don't know how to handle that potential 3rd child in that hypothetical family. It just shows how well they are not getting their arguments together in terms of how they approach these things. And on a very final point on my contribution here, I was present at the Community Safety Partnership yesterday, which was considering its priorities for the Community Safety Plan in the coming year. And one of the interesting facts that was drawn out of the report in the debate is that shoplifting offences in this borough rose by 1/3 over the last year, and half of those items stolen were either food or consumables, not stuff that you can flog in the pub, stuff that people actually need to feed their families. What an indictment.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Eyre, please.
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. So the UK has reportedly the 5th strongest economy in the world. But many of us have said there, for whose benefit? If we are the 5th strongest, I certainly pity the populations in the 3rd world countries. That said, however, this sections of our population are sliding down the social care ladder through no fault of their own. But this motion is nothing new to me. I go back, and I forget which year it was, either 2005 or 2006, at the TUC annual conferences. I was there at both. And a lady from an African 3rd world country addressed the conference, making the same plea for the same reasons as what this motion is there before members in this chamber. As then, it was unheard of in the UK that females had to go to such measures. That said, however, by the very fact of this motion, proves that section of our female population are no better than what I knew back in 2005, 2006, are no better than those 3rd world females in the African states, which sadly I got to know about. Please support this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. Councillor Lanigan, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I fully support this. I was born just after the war with 4 sisters, a dad who also worked in the steel industry and provided the best that he could. We had very little. We were always fed, and we got our new clothes at Easter with our brand new shoes that we had to take care of. Mum and Dad struggled as we were growing up, and as you can imagine, this affected 4 girls as we got into our early teens. We never regarded ourselves as being poor because we were part of the community and everybody was in the same boat then. I wouldn't like to see us revert back, and if there is a need for this, then I absolutely fully support it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Pallister, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you. I mean, Councillor mentioned about third world states. This is one of the richest countries in the world, and it is disgusting that we're bringing this motion to council. When I first became a councillor, if someone had said to me that I would be bringing such a motion, I wouldn't have believed it, but we are. Councillor Jeffries mentions about poverty. Poverty in the borough is rising. It's risen from 27.69% to 29.7%. However, in some of our wards, child poverty is between 40 to nearly 60%. Thank everyone for supporting the motion. It will be based on need and it will provide confidential support and a service that is done with dignity and that women do not feel and girls do not feel stigmatised and they feel confident to go in and receive free sanitary products if need be. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pallister. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, on to the next motion, motion 2, which I believe will be Councillor Foley-McCormack. I've got Forster on my thing, so sorry, Councillor McCluskey.
Madam Mayor, thank you for allowing me to speak. Is that motion should have been heard at the last meeting, full council meeting, and of course Councillor Forster's not here today, so she's asked me. To start with, I'd just like to thank Councillor Mason and Councillor Kay for stealing some of my thunder, mentioning the 100 years since the Suffragettes. Big thanks to the pair of you. So, in 1918, I'm not going to go through the motion, it's in front of you. So in 1918, at the end of World War I, the Representation of the People's Act was passed, enfranchising all men over 21 and women over 30, but they had to hold £5 worth of property, or with women the husbands had to. It wasn't until 10 years later that the Equal Franchise Act was passed, entitling all men and women over 21 the right to vote regardless of property ownership. Now, you know by now that if I propose a motion, I'd like you to get a bit of maths work done. My grandma was born in 1892. When did she get the vote? The National Society for Women's Suffrage was formed in 1872, where polite requests were made for women to be allowed to vote. This was supported by the Chartist movement. And I'm pleased and proud to say that one of the Chartists was actually one of my husband's ancestors, Jacob Holyoke. In 1902, textile workers from Yorkshire marched to Westminster with a suffrage petition, but they were ignored. A year later, Emmeline Pankhurst formed the Women's Social and Political Union, and in 1906, this union moved their headquarters from Leeds to London. Protests demanding women's rights to vote became more intense, and as you will all be aware, the women were arrested, thrown into prison where they were very badly treated, beaten and force-fed. The women went on the rampage, smashing windows, calling for women to strike. And in 1912, the Labour Party voted to support the suffragettes. But in 1913, under a Liberal government, the Speaker of the House of Commons announced that there would be no universal suffrage. This led to an escalation of the civil disturbances. The suffragettes committed. They attacked the Tower of London, set fire to Kew Gardens, and as we all know, Emily Davison threw herself in front of one of the King's horses. In 1918, women over 30 got the vote. This movement, which began as a silent, passive request, spiralled into an intense movement, which eventually got results. We must not let these brave women down. And also men, because there's a lot of suffrage units where it was the men's suffrage. Today, in 2018, 100 years later, we are still suffering inequality against women, as the previous motion has actually shown. Women have come a long way in their fight to be treated as equals, but we need to remember those who fought for it to happen. And one of the things that we can remember is that at the bottom of the motion is to ensure that all the young people, hopefully in years to come, over 16, will be able to vote. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Lanigan, please. Sorry, is that seconded? Thank you.
I fully support this. There's some photographs in Loftus outside the Old Kong's Church of the suffragettes there. I think it was very difficult for women in that time. My granddad was a very old school who thought that the men ruled the household, and that's how it was. And I remember my dad telling me about my gran, that she wasn't allowed to go anywhere near these unruly women who were causing dissent in the town. So I think it was very difficult at that time. I think women are extremely strong, stronger than men. I think we could rule the world, women. We've come a long way since then. I think this is wonderful that you brought this, and they're not to be forgotten. They worked hard. My mum worked in Oxford during the war on the Wellington bombers. She came over from Southern Ireland. There was a shortage of the workforce just outside Oxford doing the bombers, and she worked on the dollies, and I never knew what a dolly was, and it's a rivet, and she put the rivets in the aircraft, and they worked 12 hours a day and got a Sunday off. But she and I had discussed this at length as I was growing up, and it was a wonderful thing to happen. Emancipation of women. I don't think we're quite there yet, and I think we need to keep pushing, because I think there's a lot of passionate women about. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'm going to vote for this, but I'm not. It's. I hope you've knocked some time off for that. But, you know, it's rather a simplistic interpretation of actually what happened. This was Parliamentary Reform and the extension of the franchise. It was a process which started in 1832 when, you know, more, I'll just keep it simple, more people got the vote. In 1867, the working class got the vote for the first time. In 1884, the franchise was further extended, but still only to males. And then, of course, we come to 1918 when women, some women got the vote, and it was the vote for men was also extended. The one movement that has been totally submerged by the suffragettes was another movement called the Suffragists, who they had the same goal, but they went about things more peaceably than did the suffragettes. On the Chartists, for those who don't know, the Chartists were very democratic in their views. They were a working class movement in the middle of the 19th century, and they had 6 points in their charter. One of them, it started off actually as votes for all, including women, but then, what you missed out, they backed down, and because they thought it wouldn't be, you know, they wouldn't get popular support if they included women, and in fact it ended up votes for all men. So it was an evolving process, but the main thing, it wasn't the suffragettes that got women the vote, it was the First World War. When women went into the factories and did the jobs that men had done previously. Without the, I mean, I'm not saying the First World War was to be welcomed, but without the First World War, the women's emancipation would have probably been delayed even further. But because they'd done the jobs of men in the war, they were given the votes. But as I said earlier, it was at the age of 30, not at 18 or 16 or 21. So I'll be voting for this, but I think there's a lot more to it, to be quite honest.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thanks. I mean, I'll be very brief. I've got to take Steve apart on some of his comments. He first of all talked about the extension of the franchise to working class voters in the mid-19th and late 19th century, but forgot to say that would only be restricted to working class voters who owned a house. And they were negligible. Secondly, it wasn't a benevolent Liberal Tory coalition under Lloyd George that bestowed the extension of suffrage on women as a mark of gratitude for the work they did in the First World War. It was because they realised that women going into the workplace had become, in many cases, very militant trade unionists. They had all joined the Associated Society of Engineers, they had joined the Workers' Union, they had joined the National Union of an Allied Labour, the GMB. They were actually active in the big strikes in the engineering shops around the North East, the Midlands and Sheffield, and down in London. And the government's concern was, in a sense, in 1919, a repeat of the tensions of 1914, having to deal with the problems in Ireland, with, in that time, having effectively home rule and a revolution in Ireland, having to deal with an emerging working class who wanted their say, and thirdly, having to deal with the women's question. And the vote was conceded not as an act of gratitude, but because of sheer pressure from people from below. And that should never be lost, because that applies to us here in the Labour Party and in the socialist movement as it did then, it does today. I would like, though, just to say, I would like to say...
I never said it was a matter of gratitude, by the way.
That, I would argue, is the implication. Having said that, if I can just carry on, I think we need to think about the work of the suffragettes and suffragists in this area. And two names I think we've got to recognise. One is Alice Schofield Coates, and the other is a lady called Marion Hanson. Both of them were leading members of the Women's Freedom League, that's the suffragists. And they took part in many actions, rallies and agitation across what is now this borough, in Loftus, in Guilsborough, in Redcar, and again in Middlesbrough. And photographic evidence that remains, as well as visits to this area by Emmeline and Adela Pankhurst. So, you know, we've got to thank those people who actually did the work on the ground amongst women. And I need to say that when it came to who was the greatest supporter of both those two ladies in terms of their work on Teesside, it actually was a man who came up and stayed with them and worked with them on Teesside to help their agitational campaign. And that was a man called George Lansbury, who later became the leader of the Labour Party in the 1930s. The umbilical link is clear and decisive. It was there then, it is there today, Chair.
Thank you. Can I please remind members we've got 45 minutes left of normal time. We have 2 more motions, 5 debates, a question and answer session with a portfolio holder, and to appoint members. So can I please ask, I would love on my last meeting to get to the end of this agenda and give the new mayor a clean slate when they start. So if we can just try, and obviously I don't want to stifle debate, but you know, or we'll stay till 10 o'clock.
I recognise the pressures are under, as I think we all do, and all of us, where officers and members actually both petrified about this meeting. I think it'd be useful, because there are a number of us who have to make arrangements. I'm one, I have to say, and I'm sure there are others, to get perhaps some indication now. We're not going to hit 5 o'clock, we all know that, whether we're going to stay, and if so, what kind of limit we might want to put.
Yeah, we normally do that just about 5 o'clock, but if everyone has a thing, see if we can clear the agenda today, if anyone's willing to do that. And we'll come to the vote at 5. Councillor. Should we just carry on? We'll just carry on and just try and get as much done as we possibly can. Okay, sorry, Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Chair, don't take this out of my time, but I mean, these are the issues that the members want to discuss. So we have to make the time in some way. It clearly won't be today, but the time has to be made. That's your decision to have these things here. Can I say that this debate is turning into some sort of a historical competition? Who knows more about what went on in the past? I mean, what I know, following on from Steve Kay's point there, is that Tony Benn reminded us that the only years of full employment and workplace crashes were between 1939 and 1945, and when women again did what were regarded as traditional men's jobs. And it's interesting that after the end of that particular conflict, one of the organisations that opposed women retaining what was traditionally men's jobs was the Trade Unions Congress. Incidentally, at the same time, the Football Association was opposing women's football teams. So I suppose there's been a little bit of progress then. All I know is that universal suffrage actually terrified the ruling classes. I mean, the last thing they wanted was the working class to have a vote and upset the system that hitherto they controlled like forever. And I think there's still a continuation today of the ruling classes wanting to keep it that way. The Tories certainly regard themselves as the natural party of government. Neil Bendelow and I attended a commemoration, Neil, didn't we, of the suffragette movement just a few weeks ago at a pub up in Normanby. It's quite interesting. I think we were the only two blokes that were there. So locally, it seems, men need to get their act together again. But it was a very interesting afternoon. Not least of which was the presentation from Anna Turley, the local MP, who again did as a bit of a historical piece. But one thing that stuck in my mind was when she said that in that 100 years' time, there's actually only been 489 women MPs. Just reflect on that for a moment. And two of them, of course, were Prime Ministers, but the less said about that, I suggest the better. It's one of the reasons, incidentally, that I'm all in favour of what some people call all-women shortlists in the Labour Party to select representatives to go to Parliament. I think we should adopt that until we get gender parity, and then we can have open contest, because otherwise it's not going to change in our party, and it certainly won't change in the Tory party. I would like to ask the mover and seconder of this motion to take on board the idea of perhaps having a voter take-up campaign as part of the resolution over the next year. It's all very well having displays in libraries and things, and what wonderful things were done in the past, but let's do something in the future, because we know from what was said earlier on, turnout at elections is absolutely dreadful. Was it 26% in Mask? I can't remember. It was very low. And just to reflect what Councillor Ssi Jeffrey said, we certainly find in our ward pockets of people that don't know what the physical act of voting actually entails. I think they're embarrassed to even ask. They're certainly embarrassed to go and do it because they don't know what it means. I would finish on the point by saying that the name of Ken Livingstone's first book, I always say this on these occasions, was called If Voting Ever Changed Anything, They'd Abolish It. And that is a way of saying that ordinary people don't think much changes, even though there's a change in administration at local or parliamentary level. And of course, what that leads to, if we ignore the wishes of ordinary people, and somebody else made this point earlier on today, you get what is the emerging Brexit disaster on the other hand, on one hand, and the election of a demagogue as the United States President on the other.
Thank you. Councillor Ssi Jeffrey, please.
Right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I suppose I find it just slightly bizarre that we have men fighting about women's suffrage or the history of women's suffrage in this council chamber. That isn't. No, I don't. That isn't what this motion's about. What this motion isn't about the history. This motion is about acknowledging and recognising the contribution that women have made to secure the vote for women, and also then looking forward and ensuring that we actually celebrate that and encourage our women in the Tees Valley, in Redcar and Cleveland now, young, old, middle-aged, to get out there and vote, because the fact of the matter is they do not. An awful lot of them do not. We knock on doors, as Ian's just said, in South Bank on numbers, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience, and many, many women do not feel connected to the democratic system at all, do not feel like if they go and exercise their vote, even if they're confident to go and do it, it will make any difference to their lives. That is completely and entirely wrong. And in raising the issues about democracy, about the strength of democracy, about the impact of democracy, about the change that we can manage to deliver if we make our democracy vibrant, that's what's important about this. Women need to be able to feel confident that when they put a cross on the paper, it's actually going to change things. And at the moment, I don't think that's always the case. And every single one in this chamber, by agreeing to this motion, should also be agreeing to raise the profile of the democratic process, make it work for people, and deliver what we're supposed to deliver as elected representatives. And that's responding to the needs of the people in our communities. I think that's what this is about at the end of the day, because you don't just vote for the sake of voting, you vote for change, and that's what we should be encouraging people to do.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. As somebody, when you knock on the door and they say, I only vote, I vote the way my husband tells me to, I think it's a very apt motion. The final speaker, Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to be very quick after listening to that, and I don't want to ramble on about history and all that, but they should be very proud for look where they've got now for what's happening today. I would just like to assure all of the beautiful ladies in this room, I know my place, so I will be voting for this. I know my place. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. And would you like to sum up, Councillor Holyoke?
Well, yes, thank you for everybody who's spoken today. Can I just say I'm a bit disappointed that Councillor Mason sat down, because I was pretty certain he was going to tell me when my grandma got the vote. For those of you who... I'll tell you, it's 28th of January 1922, and she was eligible to vote in November that year. So obviously, it means a lot to me, just the fact that people, you look around this chamber today, with all these lovely looking men as well, Councillor Hunt, and all these lovely ladies, how far we have come, but we could still go further. Thank you.
And we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous, carried. Thank you. And we are on to motion 3. Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm sorry that I didn't speak on the last motion, but actually I feel that there's such synergy between all of the motions on today's agenda that actually I could have said something similar about them all. I think it's quite interesting that we have this collection of motions today. On the one hand, we are celebrating women's suffrage, and yet on the other, we're identifying two very real, very current issues that women face, and those are by no means the only issues of equality that women face today. There is what the media likes to call the gender pay gap, or as I prefer to call it, theft, which is particularly big in the news these days. But right now, I want to talk a little bit about domestic violence. And I think probably that the motion that Councillor Harding and I have set out before you today really speaks for itself. I do think that as a codicil, if you like, I should point out that the proposals are merely under consideration by the government. They are looking to review funding for domestic violence services, and the specific example in the motion today is only one of a number of options. Councillor Harding and I, however, feel that because this option is so horribly regressive, that it's really important that organisations like ours join with those of the third and voluntary sectors and women's organisations in making it very clear that this is not an option that we are prepared to accept. The changes, as it says in the motion, will replace housing benefit for victims with a payment to local authorities. Housing benefit currently provides around half of the income of refugees, and I think that politicians generally have a tendency to talk about making tough choices, but without this housing benefit contribution to refugees, the tough decisions that refugees will have to make are not just tough, they are in fact incredibly stark and could spell life and death decisions for many of our most vulnerable women who just need to be supported at what is undoubtedly an incredibly difficult time of their lives. And not just women, actually. I feel that I really must say that. Although, of course, it is largely women who are victims of domestic violence, there are a number of men and women from same-sex couples who are also impacted by it as well. The main problem, as I see it, with the system that is being proposed is that if it is introduced, it will make it more difficult for people to escape domestic violence. Many of those who are fleeing domestic violence don't stay within their own local authority area because it's simply not safe for them to do so. There are people living in refuges in Redcar and Cleveland from across the United Kingdom. And I find it difficult to understand exactly how that system would work. I will leave it to Councillor Harding to go into some of the more detailed problems of the proposal. But it seems to me that Saeed Javid this week in the anti-Semitism debate seemed to prove that he was at least capable of decent decency. And I think that with the right representations, hopefully the government will see sense and drop what I consider to be a ludicrous and potentially incredibly damaging proposal. I commend the motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Do we have a seconder?
Mayor, can I just say a couple of words?
Yeah, Councillor.
Okay. Is it on? Good, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to start with some statistics, which is from an organisation called Living Without Abuse. And what that says is that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will be affected by domestic abuse within their lifetime. It goes on to say that domestic abuse leads on average to 2 women being murdered each week and 30 men per year. So it's not just women, it does affect men as well, as Councillor Mason said. The proposals that are advocated by the incumbent government are going to effectively remove the safety net afforded by the welfare state to these people, as is indicated in the motion there. The brutal consequences of this really speak for themselves. Less protection for the vulnerable, leading to more people dying, with further demands on the police and on social services. Point 2 goes on to note that the changes will see the end to housing benefit monies for victims of domestic abuse, as Councillor Mason has just mentioned there, to fund their housing costs whilst in refuges. In addition to physical abuse, which is when you're physically hurt, punched in the face, domestic abuse is also defined. I think it's really important to understand what domestic abuse is. It's defined as behaviour that is controlling and coercive. And examples of this include intimidation, being afraid to leave home, as you've been told if you do leave home that you'll be killed, degrading comments, being told that you're stupid, ugly, too old, too stupid to find anybody else. Being provided with no financial resources to take care of yourself and or your children, and a social isolation and a lack of privacy with, for example, your phone and your internet accounts being regularly hacked or scrutinised. The Serious Crime Act 2015 took coercive control so seriously that it is punishable with a sentence of up to 5 years. Leaving home after you've been threatened with death is a huge challenge for victims of domestic abuse. The removal of housing benefits to secure sanctuary will make this decision, as Councillor Mason has stated there, much more difficult. The alternative, of course, is to stay in an abusive relationship and risk becoming a statistic. Point 3 of the motion relates to the source of income provided to refugees being approximately 50%. Now, I know that some councillors are already aware that some of the refugees locally are already stretched to breaking point. It's also really important to understand that refugees don't just provide housing, although of course that's critical. They provide services that allow these people to rebuild their lives. Alternative support for issues such as mental health following a relationship breakdown are also at breaking point. So this proposed change impacts on issues other than housing and potentially takes away the ability of those affected by domestic abuse to turn their lives round. Point 4 talks about a replacement grant to local authorities providing short-term housing support to refugees.
Can you sum up, please, Councillor Harding?
I'll be quick as I can. Being an appropriate replacement. The key worry here is, what if I don't fit the criteria? It's another barrier to taking that step to leaving the home. Can I also finally just quickly quote one vital statistic that concerns this issue? And this is from Shelter this time. Domestic abuse is the single biggest reason for people becoming homeless. Can I also finally ask everybody to refer to where we rank in Cleveland domestic abuse related combined incidents and crime per thousand? Unfortunately, only superseded by Durham. We are the worst, one of the worst places in the UK for this to be affected. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. Councillor Graham Jeffrey, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will wholeheartedly support this motion. I do believe I've seen, I'll keep it as brief as I can, but I have seen Women's Aid in action quite a lot recently, unfortunately. And I would say what a fantastic organisation. I've written to my MP some time ago to ask him to vote against any of these proposals, and hopefully he will. Just a quick one, though, a suggestion that pre-council meeting, it might be worth asking Women's Aid to come and do a presentation of what they actually do, because a lot of people here I don't think really know, but it is a fantastic organisation. I think really if we can support it, we can. And one other thing, when we have a vote on this, can we have a recorded vote? So then all of those people that agree with this, their name goes on the letter to Savage Javid. Okay.
Councillor Pallister, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Mason's correct. We are still waiting for a response back from government on their final proposals for supported housing. If, however, that the refuge does not become separate from other short-term supported housing, we at least need assurance that government funding for supported housing, which includes refuges, is ring-fenced indefinitely. In the meantime, I have asked the Council to begin to prepare for the proposed replacement of housing benefit monies with a grant to local authorities to provide short-term accommodation costs. I've asked what plans do we currently have in place to jointly collect data that will provide government with robust information on short-term supported housing so that we do get the fair share of our funding and we're well prepared for the new changes. Several weeks ago, I also received a letter from the Labour MP, Harriet Harman, and she wrote to ask the chair of the Redcar and Cleveland Domestic Abuse Partnership, would I support Clause 1 within the forthcoming Domestic Violence and Abuse Bill for the establishment of a national pot of funding for refuges. I've since sent her a letter of support. Her proposal is that there should be a percentage of the gross national income from central government funding of refuges to give them the security they need in order for women to have and men to have safety when they need it. This funding would be a tiny percentage of government spending overall, but would be hugely important to protecting those who find themselves in need of domestic abuse services. I think Councillor Harding was right to touch on that this isn't just about accommodation. There's some excellent services being delivered in Redcar and Cleveland, and we need to ensure that funding and sustainable funding for refuges and the support that goes along with that is provided from central government and is given the priority that it should be given. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pallister. We've got 3 more speakers on this. Councillor Lanigan, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I fully support this. I'm actually looking at the statistics on this that you gave us. I actually feel, because that looks as if it's 27 out of 1,000, I can absolutely assure you there's a great deal more than that. And probably not reported to the police. I know a lot of women in abusive relationships who stay there because they have no alternative, and that's very sad. And there's little ones to consider, and it's been difficult. There was a case in the media not so many days ago about a young lady who'd done this to her partner and had badly abused him. Physically as well as mentally. This young lady was an educated graduate, so she didn't have excuses for her behaviour. Not that people from working class have either, but she came across as a well-balanced, educated woman. The torture that she had inflicted on this man was absolutely appalling, and I applaud him for coming forth. There are a lot of men who are abused, but I've got to say, Councillor Mason, I welcome that you've brought this, but I actually feel this is the tip of the iceberg within Redcar and Cleveland, and I am sure that there is more than 27 out of every 1,000 people, women and men, in the Redcar and Cleveland area who are suffering this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Just on the thing that was circulated, Chair, I hold no particular brief for Cleveland Police, but somebody once said there were statistics, lies and some editorials, and I think perhaps we might need to take this with a pinch of salt, because does this indicate in any way a higher level of reporting and more confidence in the system rather than just the bland reporting of figures themselves? So it doesn't necessarily mean you're dealing with a force that doesn't have responsive mechanisms to deal with complaints. And I'm fairly certain that in the current circumstances that is the position of Cleveland Police. They do deal with these issues as robustly and sensitively as they actually can. As Councillor Mason might acknowledge, that not only is this review going on, there's actually a consultation on domestic violence. It's entitled Transforming the Response to Domestic Abuse, and it was actually launched on International Women's Day, would you believe, by the Prime Minister herself. And my response to the consultation, which incidentally completes at the end of May, and the Domestic Abuse Partnership is constructing its own response to that. But my response would be, doesn't the government know what the issues are? Doesn't the government know that their cuts disproportionately affect women, and particularly vulnerable women, and women fleeing domestic violence are clearly very vulnerable? Doesn't the government know that women's refuges are closed as a consequence? And don't they appreciate, and this was Councillor Harding's point, that 2 women a week are killed by their partners or ex-partners, and that's been a statistic that's been sustained for the last 10, probably 15 years. So it's an outrage in itself. If it were happening anywhere else, and perhaps particularly to men, there might be more focus on those issues as a matter of urgency. Now, we're all familiar with cuts, but one cut that is prominent in this debate is that of legal aid. And legal aid funding since 2010 has actually been cut by 40%. And you've even got barristers, incidentally, barristers going on strike to oppose that reduction in service insofar as the criminal justice is concerned. But it does impact again on the most vulnerable people that are actually seeking justice, and particularly those fleeing domestic violence. About a year ago, a campaign was launched called Scrap the Fee, actually led by Tom Watson, who's the deputy leader of the Labour Party. And one way women can access legal aid if they're fleeing domestic violence is to have a note from a local pillar of the community, generally a GP. That letter will suffice in most cases to get them access to legal aid. But some, if not all GPs, are charging women to £75 for the principal, which is a sum that many in that position actually can't afford. I've got to say the local police crime commissioner and others up and down the country are supporting this campaign as well. The response from the local medical committee, which is where the GPs gather, says that GPs are private businesses and this is a matter for them. Well, yes, of course it is, but aren't some of these GPs wealthy enough or well off enough not to charge £75 just to write a letter for somebody that's in desperate need? Now, this has been raised in the Domestic Abuse Partnership. It's been as recently as yesterday in the Community Safety Partnership, and we understand there's some movement in the GPs. We need to press them further, and it's also being discussed in the Local Health and Wellbeing Board. As I've said, the Domestic Abuse Partnership, and Lynn's more aware of this than me, is constructing a response to the consultation. The areas it's currently looking at are obviously funding, services for women from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and particularly importantly, educating young children about domestic violence and what it means and what it does. So I would say, good luck with the letters. You're probably going to need it. Perhaps you might like to send a copy to the Prime Minister, since she's launched this other consultation campaign.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Philip Thompson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't think, as we sit in the comfort of this chamber, that we can perhaps even begin to conceive of the trauma and tragedy of someone locked into a chamber where they cannot escape from as a result of domestic violence. So this is a serious issue to be talked about, I think, without reference to we should know it all by now. We are forever learning from experiences. If legislation could be made correct from the outset, why would we continue to have legislators sitting and reviewing? So this is an opportunity. Let us grasp it. The Minister has said that he has certain suggestions to put forward, but he has an open mind and he's given certain commitments, and I've checked on what they are. Now, I remember going to, as a corporate parent, as part of our responsibility, that we should understand what safeguarding is about. And the training session that I recall, which is some years ago now, so it would be good to have a review and a refresh, nothing wrong with that, was that the domestic abuse takes so many forms. Now, it can be headline, but to get inside that and understand all the elements and all the facets that contribute to domestic abuse does take a challenge. Now, we've heard that the launch was by the Prime Minister. All credit to her for that, for recognising the importance of this consultation. So let us grasp this opportunity and engage with it. So some of the things that I understand are going to be consulted on in this legislation proposal is that we're going to define, strangely enough, for the first time ever, a statutory definition of domestic abuse. So what don't we know? Why has it taken this long, one might ask? But that is part of the consultation. Now, we do know that abuse can take many forms. One of them is economic. How many times have we heard this afternoon about the challenges that individual families face in this community, of poverty levels? And the statistics here that we've been given to look at from Councillor Harding on domestic abuse related incidents. You know, it's not a statistic that we want to be showing to the world, is it? Come to the Tees Valley. So let us address this responsibly. Now, we're also suggesting that we're going to get domestic abuse protection orders to better shield victims against further abuse. Because one of the difficulties that any victim is how much do you proclaim this assault? Because if you can't escape that environment, there is no incentive to continue to argue a case. We're talking about the creation of a domestic abuse commissioner. Now, I don't know whether that will have any value at the end of the day, but if it's another source of support for those people who do need, undoubtedly, support, then let us consider it. Funding has been allocated last year, has it not? £20 million. And we've talked about if the housing benefit ratios and how that allocation might be varied, that's going to be a challenge. So, Madam Mayor, there are so many aspects to this, only some of which have been listed in this motion. But I do feel that the principle is that we should engage with discussion. We should reply positively to consultation. And if I can conclude, Madam Mayor, by saying that the Minister has already said that the amount of bed spaces in refuges, despite the statistics from Women's Aid, and I don't wish to challenge that in that sense, have increased by 10% since 2010, from 3467 to 3798. And he has given a commitment that more will be done so that refuge spaces are always available in the future for women who need them. Now, that's on record. Let's hold them to that. Let's respond positively as a combined council in asking for the review to be held and for us to continue as individuals to offer suggestions.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, would you like to sum up, please?
Councillor Graham Jeffrey, for a recorded vote.
Sorry, yes, there was. I checked with the monitoring officer who said everybody who wanted to put their name to the letter directly could do it rather than have a recording book, so we haven't got it set up. Is that acceptable to you? Yeah? Oh, thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think everybody was broadly supportive of this motion. I think that Councillor Thompson is right, and this is about expressing a view about one aspect of a proposed reform, and there are lots more aspects of that proposed reform that we can and should be commenting on. Councillor Harding and I were moved by this particular issue, and we decided to put this motion forward. I do certainly think that we should be proactively engaging with the government. I am not a person who believes that because the government is formed of an opposition party that we should cock a snoot and not engage with them. I think, and to quote the late Dale Winton, actually, you have to be in it to win it. On statistics, a couple of people have mentioned statistics, and I think the Durham statistics on this form are actually very interesting, because Durham Constabulary, or Durham, whatever it's called, police force, Durham Police Authority? No, they're not called that anymore. Anyway, Durham is one of the first forces in the United Kingdom to take a proactive approach to training their officers on coercive control, which only became legislation in 2015, I think. And they have really been at the vanguard of prosecutions and identifying cases of coercive control. So I think in some ways those statistics can be misleading, and in lots of ways it should be looked on as quite positive that those figures are so high for Durham, because it shows that more people are reporting domestic violence, and also reporting domestic violence of different types, including coercive control, including Councillor Thompson's financial abuse. Not Councillor Thompson's financial abuse, but he mentioned it. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was Councillor Ian Jeffries' reference to ancillary services, which have suffered dramatically, and which actually very often don't feature in our debates. A couple of council meetings ago, we had a debate about Cleveland Police and about policing levels, and we talked a lot about having bobbies on the beat and how many police officers we didn't have that we used to have. But what we didn't talk about was cuts to the probation service, was the reduction in the support that offenders and prospective offenders might be getting through drug and alcohol services, parole, probation, all of these sorts of organisations. And it's vital that we put these ancillary services that have been and are continuing to be affected by austerity back on the map. And I think that refuges and domestic violence organisations are just one of those ancillary organisations. Thank you for taking the time to debate this motion, and I commend it to you all.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Carried. Thank you. Right. I know what I'm going to say now. As the meeting is about to extend 3 hours in length, can I remind members that it will automatically adjourn at 5 p.m. unless Council decides to set aside Standing Order number 9. Does anyone wish to propose that the meeting continues after 5 o'clock, and if so, how long should we continue for? Councillor Thompson?
In the knowledge of the portfolio holder's disappearance at the hour 5:30.
Half an hour. Is that seconded? Any other proposals? Oh, okay, the meeting will continue until 5:30. Oh, sorry, can we have a vote, please? 5:30 p.m?
Yeah.
That's carried, thank you. Final agenda. Okay, we're on to the first Cabinet report. Councillor Sue Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. This is the Cabinet report delivering a flourishing future corporate plan outturn report 2017-18. It's a number of pages long, and I've highlighted lots of things on every page, but I'm not going to do it. The report is obviously the annual update on our progress. You'll have seen it at a number of different places. It's been seen at scrutiny, and it's been seen at Cabinet. It's also been circulated, the narrative associated with it, in the Council magazine in the last edition, or it might even have been the edition before, actually. It's an interesting report that basically sets out our progress. There's some very, just in terms of reflecting on last year, things that we've discussed really through the course of this afternoon: closure of SSI, development of the Development Corporation, the cuts that we've had to make collectively through Shaping Our Future, but our planned programme, the fact that that's balanced off by our area growth plans, and then some of our stress areas, and particularly highlighted here the issues around looked after children. And then there's listed some of our achievements under each of the new corporate plan headings, and I think if you read those you'll see that there has been some significant achievements and lots of things that we've done that have actually been a success. However, if you look to the paragraph 2.19, which is towards the end of the report, it actually gives you the details for the measures that are included in the tables at the back, and you'll see that even though we have had some success, we have carefully planned, and we are very thoughtful in the way that we try and shape the work that we do, our performance continues to be at the lower end of rankings for many of those measures, lower end for 11, in the bottom, sorry, just read this out because I always get it wrong. For the 19 measures, our performance is at the lower end of the rankings, with 11 measures in the bottom four, 4 in the middle 4, and 4 in the top 4. And direction of travel from previous ranks shows improvement in 5 measures, but worsening in 9, and no movement of travel in 5. So I think that what that indicates is just the challenges that this borough continues to have, but I think the work we do addresses those as best we can. And just taking you to the recommendations in paragraph 9.1, I think what is really important is that we do publicly note the achievement of so many people, both within this council and without, staff, members, partners and our communities, in helping us deliver the improvements that we've had, especially in a period when things have been so difficult. So I'm happy to take any questions, but otherwise recommend this report to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that report seconded, please?
Yeah, can I second the report and reserve the right to speak?
That's Councillor Councillor Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to note 1 or 2 points that were made at the Resources Scrutiny Committee, which obviously approved this. First of all, I want to make a personal comment first. I've just got 3 things to say. One is I think this is a naff title. A flourishing future, prosperous future might be, whatever. But I mean, there must be something better than that. It's a bit like our this and our that we had before. So let's call spades spades, should we really? Secondly, I was very glad to get a response after the committee from the responsible officer about the what you might call selective statistics that appear here, and the need for more, so we get a much better picture of the economic prosperity and, or otherwise of the borough. For example, the actual growth rates and also productivity and so forth. And I think it would be very useful if the response that I did get was in fact extended. And finally, I just want to say that the Resources Committee did actually endorse this report, and I think it's important that we get regular updates on this so that we can examine what is actually going on within the borough and but I think we do need a much better and wider picture of what is actually happening.
Would you like to sum up, Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, just responding to those points. The first one is the Flourishing Future thing. I would just remind you that the Flourishing Future is part of our newly adopted vision for the borough, and people will remember the full thing. It's a flourishing future forged from a proud past. We have all been party to agreeing that, and I think it's something that certainly sticks in my memory, and it's something that I think very, very well describes our borough and what we're trying to achieve. So I'm sorry, I can't accept the criticism of the title. In terms of the selective statistics, this is a high-level dashboard. That's the whole point of an annual report. We do get detailed statistics. We get detailed statistics on a very regular basis to each of the scrutiny committees. That gives us an opportunity to examine the progress right across the range of work that the council does. So I think we just need to remember that this is just the annual report, and there are lots and lots of opportunities in the work that the council does to have a proper look at the detailed statistics that sit underneath this high-level dashboard. But I hope members would approve this report.
Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. On to Councillor Pallister, Single Health and Wellbeing Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Purpose of the report is to recommend the establishment of a single health and wellbeing board between Middlesbrough Borough Council and Redcar and Cleveland Council. It's now been 5 years since health and wellbeing boards were established as part of the Health and Social Care Act 2012. Since then, health and wellbeing boards have taken on additional responsibilities such as the Better Care Fund and the Improved Better Care Fund, including the requirement to develop an integrated vision for health and social care. And although integration of health and social care is a key priority going forward, there has been concerns nationally that health and wellbeing boards are dominated by NHS and health and social care issues, with less focus on improving wellbeing and children and young people's outcomes. Following a joint development session, a draft vision and priority themes were agreed. The vision is to empower citizens of the South Tees to live longer and healthier lives, and it will focus on 3 themes: inequalities, integration and collaboration, information and data sharing. Both Middlesbrough and Redcar and Cleveland Council have high levels of inequality, and a single health and wellbeing board will provide an opportunity to develop beyond health and social care agendas. We've listened today about domestic abuse, poverty. We've celebrated the work of the Grangetown Training Hub in terms of reducing worklessness, and we've had a presentation from Edward on mental health and emotional wellbeing. One of the examples of working together has been the successful Sports England bid, and that was through collaboration of skills and resources, data and joint commitment of both local authorities. In establishing a single health and wellbeing board, there will also be opportunities to provide greater, broader political engagements across both Redcar and Cleveland Cabinet, Middlesbrough Executive and through our scrutiny processes. It will create a stronger voice across the region, both to access additional external funding and to challenge and hold to account wider transformational programmes. To support the board in the delivery of its priorities, it is proposed that a single health and wellbeing executive is formed. This will build on the current Redcar and Cleveland Health and Wellbeing Executive and the South Tees Integration Executive Group. Both the leader and the mayor both chairs, the leader and the mayor of Middlesbrough Council, will have standing invitation to attend all the executive meetings. Additional officers will also be invited or co-opted onto the executive as the agenda dictates. The report's been through the Council's adult and scrutiny processes, and it's gone through Cabinet and also Governance Committee, and the following responses were made. A 2-year term, ensuring appropriate structures are in place, ensuring that area-specific issues are given full consideration, such as our rural areas and specific communities, and reviewing the size of the board to ensure it is an effective partnership that will continue to be worked on as part of the board's development programme. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Pallister, is that seconded, please?
I'll second that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Chair of the Governance Committee, I just wanted to share the comments of the committee that was held on the 10th of April to examine this proposal. The debate took place on the issues contained in the report, and some of the comments raised and discussed were that the proposed membership was too large, which would result in members not being given enough time to speak and important business not being discussed. How would it be ensured that issues specific to particular areas, such as issues facing Redcar and Cleveland rural areas, were dealt with effectively, along with issues that affected both Redcar and Cleveland and Middlesbrough equally? there should be at least 2 non-executive members from each council on the board. While the size of the board was unwieldy, there would be a good opportunity for smaller groups to break off to tackle specific issues, and the rotation of the chair could result in the lack of responsibility and accountability. Finally, the supporting structures that needed to be in place to ensure the joint board would be a success had not yet been determined. Clearer timescales needed to be given for when the structures would be in place. The committee decided that it supported the proposed establishment of a single health and wellbeing board, and also they asked that it would be recommended that the Borough Council consider the appointment of the Health and Wellbeing Board Chair on a 2-year basis in order to have an increased level of accountability. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Ovens, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Smith has just said already much of what I was going to say. I think it is welcome largely because we share a Director of Public Health and it makes perfect sense to do that. We also share similar challenges of poor health, ageing population, deprivation, reduced budgets, etc., etc. However, I think when we discussed this recently, it is the issue maybe of the size of the board, how it's going to be organised, that it's not too unwieldy, and also that Middlesbrough is such a very different geographical area to ourselves. The cognizance is taken of the fact that we have a very diverse borough with a very rural aspect. So some solutions for the Middlesbrough area would not necessarily be the right ones for us. So I think with those concerns expressed, we'd largely welcome this and hope it is effective. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Watts, please. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Madam. Could Councillor Pallister explain who's going to scrutinise this? She refers to relevant scrutiny committee. Now, currently, health matters are considered by the Adults Scrutiny Committee. We also have a joint health scrutiny committee with Middlesbrough, and recently there was another joint committee formed to consider reductions in service for the respite care. I do think we need some clarification, not just relevant.
Thank you. Would you like to sum up, please, Councillor Pallister?
Can I just take Councillor Watt's question first? The scrutiny, we've got adults and community scrutiny. There's no reason whatsoever why the reports from the Single Health and Wellbeing Board can't go to any other scrutiny committees within Redcar and Cleveland or Middlesbrough. And you're right that we have a joint scrutiny committee with Middlesbrough Council, so it was the reports of the Health and Wellbeing Board would still go to those committees. However, I have to say it's very, very rare that the reports of any Health and Wellbeing Board meetings have ever gone to a scrutiny committee. And I hope, and we will look at developing much better support structures and much better performance frameworks for what actually is achieved through the Health and Wellbeing Board. Because at the moment, I actually think there's work being done that members don't necessarily know what's happening, and there's no record of how it's actually making a real difference out there in communities. So I suppose that leads me on to the question around how such a larger board covering two authorities will actually take into consideration some of the rural areas of Redcar and Cleveland Borough. We've got the Adults and Communities Directorate now, and that's precisely the communities part of the name of that directorate is precisely to engage much better with our communities. And that's what we'll be doing in terms of making sure that the needs of the rural end of the borough and the urban areas are actually fed into that Health and Wellbeing Board. I think the difference will be that we're looking to be smarter at the task and finish group. So the executive will look at all the information and the reports that we currently get on the Better Care Fund and the health and social care integration and so on. And the task and finish groups will actually delve down into the real issues that we've talked about today that are not getting dealt with currently on the Health and Wellbeing Board, both in Middlesbrough and Redcar and Cleveland. So I think with we've got a joint community development and community health, public health team together now. We've got the joint public health service, and I think that area of work will only improve what we can do to address the inequalities. I can assure all members in the authority that we will address the inequalities such as domestic abuse, poverty, worklessness, obesity, mental health, and we'll do it much better than we have done. That's not to say there's not some excellent work going on in Redcar and Cleveland and Middlesbrough, but I think we've got a real opportunity to do much more jointly and also utilise the way that we're developing our community assets, our community health teams, in conjunction with our community development work. So in terms of Councillor Smith's responses that were provided from the Governance Committee, we did look at the 2-year term. It was felt that because the local elections were next year, that would be quite difficult to do. The other one was ensuring appropriate support structures are in place, and the Health and Wellbeing Executive is developing the support structures, the work plan and the performance framework, and this will be presented to the next board meeting. Ensuring, again, I've talked about area-specific work in terms of our rural communities and some target work in specific areas which are suffering in terms of poverty and inequalities. And reviewing the size of the board, I think it was Councillor Norton said really it's 6 members, and that's actually 6 more elected members, and I think the more political I suppose influence we have on these agendas, the better. And so can I move the recommendations to the Borough Council that, taking into account of the comments of Governance Committee and scrutiny, that a joint Health and Wellbeing Board be established between Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council and Middlesbrough Borough Council in place of the current arrangements, and the monitoring officer be authorised to update the Constitution to reflect these changes. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pallister. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. And appointments to outside bodies, Councillor Massey, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members will be aware that we received a motion nearly 2 years ago from the former councillor Valerie Halton, expressing that outside bodies should be agreed by the council itself rather than being a cabinet function. And I think at the time that was supported pretty much unanimously, because we recognise that people from all political parties and people who aren't part of political parties have expertise which they could offer the council on such bodies. As such, the Governance Review Working Group in February this year looked at this issue. We'd have liked to look at it a bit earlier, but we got fixated by the boundary review. As such, it's now been through governance, and the recommendations that you see in the Cabinet Workbook from March are from the Governance Review Working Group, and they are that the majority of outside bodies, which are included on Appendix 1, which is on page 126 of the Cabinet Book, the majority of outside bodies should be a function of the council, so the council will appoint members to those outside bodies. A few outside bodies will remain a function of the cabinet, and this was felt by the Governance Review Working Group that it was appropriate for such groups as the ANEC Leaders and Mayor Group should clearly have the leader on if it still exists. The Culture Partnership should probably have the Culture Cabinet member on. The Housing Consortium should probably have the Housing Cabinet member on. So for a few of these outside bodies, it is suggested by the Governance Review Working Group and the Cabinet to full council that they should remain as a gift of the executive, but for the vast majority it is suggested that it should be a council appointment. So I move that responsibility for making outside body appointments becomes a function of the Borough Council, save for those bodies identified as being appropriate to remain an executive function, and that the Constitution should be amended to reflect these decisions. I move.
Thank you. Councillor Massey, do we have a seconder, please?
Can I second that, please?
Yeah. And Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you once again, Madam Mayor. First of all, I welcome these changes, particularly in principle. And I think they are just a necessary condition as far as I'm concerned at the moment. I think it's important that we have a wider franchise for these selection of the members from the council for these bodies. And I think it's also important that elected councillors in this chamber are given more opportunities to be involved in decision making. I've got one or two sort of reservations to question some of the issues involving the appointment by the Cabinet. I don't know why the Industry Nature Conservation Association really does need a Cabinet member, Cabinet appointment. Seems to me to be a justification that's listed there on page 127 of the Cabinet papers. The other point is there's no reference to ANEC in the Association of North East Councils in general. It just mentions the leaders and elected mayors. So perhaps Councillor Massey could enlighten us a little bit on that particular issue. My third point of reservation is to do with the Local Government Association General Assembly. It actually says the Local Government General Assembly here. And I think there should be cross-party representation from this council for that body because we need to have more than just the leader having an input in that. I know there are issues of finance that are relevant to this in terms of expenses and so forth, but I think it's something that really does need to be considered by the Governance Committee. As I said, I think these are necessary conditions, but they're not sufficient conditions for real changes. I think it's important that we have, in the past, neglected to have reporting back to this council on these outside bodies. And I'm very glad to see that the Governance Committee, at least that's what we're told at the Resources Scrutiny Committee, the Governance Committee is looking into this issue. And I'd be very grateful if they would resolve it, because I want to get rid of that bee in my bonnet that I've got about it. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, I'm quite prepared to vote for this, but I'd like to have some reassurance that some of those points I've made would actually be looked into.
Thank you. Councillor Philip Thompson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've heard that the Cabinet wished to reserve the authority to nominate in certain circumstances, and then they are quite happy to have delegated to this body the right in other circumstances. However, in respect of para 2.7, it refers to that it may not be either of these, because the Cabinet may not know whether it should be taking a decision or not to appoint, and therefore the appointment may not be a Cabinet member. But does that mean that they will still appoint, but not a Cabinet member, but Chamber will not have the right to vote?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kerr, please.
Yes, just following up what Councillor Nightingale said, I thought at our subcommittee we agreed that members of outside bodies would report back, but to avoid what I said call last meeting turgid reports one after another, you know, going on, if we kept going it would be 8 o'clock tonight, that there'd be a written report put in the back of the order book rather than a verbal report which would obviously go on much longer. I thought that was what we agreed to, but obviously I stand to be corrected. No doubt somebody was taking the minutes of the meeting.
Sum up, please.
Yeah, I think on Councillor Kerr's last point, my recollection of the meeting is something broadly similar in the sense that members of outside bodies would get the chance to report back to the scrutiny process, but it would potentially feature as an addendum to the council papers. But obviously members of outside bodies, like we heard with the police debate a few months ago now, you can bring issues to the council's attention, but it wouldn't be something that was done as kind of a 3 times a year basis unless you've made that decision yourself. But scrutiny, certainly, I'm sure it's your chairmanship would hear the views of people whose outside bodies sit within your committee. I think on Councillor Thompson's point, which I only caught a little bit of, these are cabinet recommendations, but the cabinet based its recommendations on the broad consensus of the governance review working group. These were not things that we held on to preciously. It was just felt that for the most part, where a cabinet member is appointed to a board, such as the leaders board, it should be the leader quite clearly who is on it. But I take your point about making sure that this is accurate in the future and reflects the decisions of the council in future. I know that one of our Democratic Services team was working on making sure that all these outside bodies still existed, still required the level of representation they've been used to, etc., etc. Because I know Mary's laughing because she remembers that there's certain things on here where we're not entirely certain at this point. We have made contact, but it's been a slow process, and that's something that the review group can certainly pick up if it meets in future, and I'm sure it's something governance can pick up if not. And on Councillor Nightingale's points, ANEC doesn't really exist anymore, but there's still a few kind of hang-ons from previous arrangements, so there's still the procurement committee still exists. There's still the odd task and finish group which exists in name as opposed to purpose. But I think it's felt that over time, a lot of those functions will be more Tees Valley based through the combined authority as opposed to being North East based. The General Assembly of the LGA asks for one member of every council to be appointed. It's not our decision, it is the LGA's decision, because it only means once a year. It's the Parliament of the local government, if you were, and only one member gets requested. And in the LGA's advice is that member should probably be the leader, because the leader reflects that. We have a strange council, as members are aware. It's a different set of political circumstances, but I certainly feel that that is the appropriate suggestion that's being made here. And the reporting back point, I think I've covered that you raised through Councillor Kay's point. I think we all want to see it, but we need to know exactly how it's going to work, and it probably needs to be written down how it's going to work. And that's something I'm sure that we can pick up through the governance process moving forward. And I move the report again.
Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. We've got 8 minutes. So over to Councillor Hannaway for a very brief resume of...
Necessarily brief, Madam Mayor. Especially since Councillor Watts has already told me she thinks this is a good report, so I'm home and dry. So the number of looked after children have gone up to 277. It's another step up in the numbers. It now means that 1 in 100 of children in the borough are looked after children. The reasons for this are multifaceted, and each situation is different, but sadly the child's safety and welfare is always at the root. And the reasons include all the reasons we've heard about today in this building: poverty, domestic violence, and mental health. I'd like to invite everyone to the launch of our new fostering campaign next week on the 25th of April at 5 to 7 p.m. here in the Heart. Some of you may have seen the great big posters on the side of bus stops featuring our own mayor and foster carer. So you're most welcome to come to that. 2.1, that section on our personal education plans was written by our new virtual schools head, who's responsible for making sure that all the looked after children get the best possible education. And I've been very impressed with the way he started in his job. He's a young and energetic officer, and he's determined to get a grip of these and to make sure that these aren't just plans that are signed off by the school, but they're real. He's going to go and visit the schools, tell them what a good personal education plan looks like, and then he's going to go back to make sure they've done it properly and produce a report so they can see how they're doing. Permanency adoption, Adoption Tees Valley will go live officially on the 1st of May. They now have a permanent service manager. And if I could tell you, Madam Mayor, in your capacity of chair of the Corporate Parenting Board, that the issue we discussed about elected members sitting on those panels is now resolved. There will be elected members sitting on those panels. In terms of our looked after children's team, 6 of our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children have been involved in a program called Mend the Gap, which involved Durham University and Teesside University and the North East Social Work Alliance. And the purpose of this was to share experiences, knowledge and skills, and to promote a wider cultural understanding. 2.5, our leaving care service is working with 102 young people currently, and our Foundation for Jobs programme continues to support them with their education and training. Moving on to child sexual exploitation, we continue our programme of raising awareness, and this time the report focuses on young carers, who are one group who are particularly vulnerable in this area. We've also run a programme called Safe Choices about relationships and sexual health. It's been run in youth clubs and in schools and has involved our youth service. I'd like to draw your attention to county lines, which is a term used by the police to describe the approach often taken by gangs which come from large urban areas into coastal towns and rural areas to commit crimes, and that there is currently a task and finish group which has been established in Redcar and Cleveland to determine if this is a problem in our area, what extent the problem is, and how best to respond to it. And finally, of all of the taxi drivers in Redcar and Cleveland, only 50 now have not done the CSE awareness course. When they've done it, they'll have all done it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you. Dr. Caroline Jackson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question, Councillor Hannaway, about the PEP judgments, and that only 51.1% are judged as good. I think I'm right in saying that we invested in a new system late last year, was it? Which was supposed to up the standard, and it doesn't really seem to have upped very much. It's quite disappointing, the figures, I think you'll agree. And I just wondered if you could comment on that and what we're going to do to improve on those, and in fact why they aren't better already.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A good report, as usual, comprehensive. The graph, the columns do not relate to the matrix on page 2. So before we publish the report, could we have some veracity in it? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to pass on my congratulations to a former looked after child who was briefly in care with Redcar and Cleveland Council, who after finishing Sheffield Hallam University has been offered a job working with Ralph Lauren in New York. Now, she currently doesn't have the funding because it's a 6-month paid internship, so keep watching out for information from me, and if anyone knows of anyone who can help her get to New York, please get in touch with me. Craig Hannaway, would you like to sum up, please?
On the subject of the PEPs, yes, hands up, they have been a long time coming, too long. And the figures are not good there, but at least we now have such figures. And you know, there are issues sometimes with schools that sign off things, and when you look at the underlying reality, it's not there. I'm very pleased that we now have what seems to me a very good virtual head, and I feel assured that he's going to take this in hand and make sure that instead of half of them being good, that they will all be good. But that was a good point you made. Yeah, they have been a long time coming and they need to be better. Councillor Thompson, you get the prize for most vigilant councillor of the day. Yes, you're quite right. It was. I'm afraid I'm much more vigilant about words than I am about pictures, unfortunately, and that had already gone in by the time I spotted that the columns in the graph do not match the description of categories of need at the side. It's the description that's the right information, and you're quite right. The N1, N2 and N4 columns don't work. Yes, apologies for that.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. Can we go to the vote, please? All those in favour?
Carried.
That's carried unanimously. Would anyone like to propose an extension? I know Councillor Brown's got to go, so can we defer that? So I was just going to go straight on to the appointing members for Councillor Ryder to replace Councillor Higgins on the Personal General Purposes Committee, and Councillor Ryder to replace Councillor Watts on the Regulatory Committee. All those in favour? Thank you. And could I please ask that all women members meet outside straight away for a photo quickly after the meeting? That's possible. Sorry, could all women members meet outside for a photograph quickly after the meeting? Just declare the meeting closed, yeah? Thank you, declare the meeting closed. Thanks for attending.